Oh, good. All right. Again, welcome to everybody that's here and everybody that's viewing. This is, as some of you may know, this is the Cincinnati School Board's meeting that is for the Committee of the Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee. And we meet on a monthly basis and sometimes have extra opportunities to meet as well. We have a full agenda and tremendous members of the staff and others that are here, and we're excited to have this kind of participation. Rob will give us the do about participating if we have an opportunity. So Rob, if you'll do the do, and then we'll do the circle and introduce everybody.
Good morning. If you'd like to participate in today's meeting, please click the hand icon at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. We will then text you your name, ask you your name and school affiliation, and we will invite you in during your 2 minutes to speak at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And Rob, if you'll introduce yourself.
Rob Wilson, technician.
Rob.
Good morning. Bertie Hutchins, contract analyst.
Jennifer Wagner, Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer.
Kevin Ashley, Director of Financial Reporting and Transparency.
Good morning, Lauren Roberts, Chief Audit Executive.
Good morning, Kareem Moffitt, board member.
Eve Bolton, board member.
Brandon Craig, board member.
Justin Ogilvie, parent and Clifton Town Meeting representative.
Shara Fisher-Jackson, CEO of the Cincinnati Preschool Promise.
Hector Polanco, Chief Financial Officer of the Cincinnati Preschool Promise.
Vera Brooks, Cincinnati Public Schools Director of Early Childhood.
Hi, Julia Angelesio, Director of Human Resources and Talent.
Emily Bell with ASME, Local 232.
Great, welcome. And we also have with us
Eric Newville.
Representing
Voters.
Thank you. Well, we'll get started. It's a lengthy, as usual, lengthy agenda. And obviously, we have a lot of folks to participate. We have things that are on the agenda. We have a couple of things to probably add to the agenda regarding some of our guests. So we will proceed. And we'll start. Unusually, we'll start with the topic number one and move through that. And then we will proceed. And the treasurer will be introducing a lot of folks that will be presenting, but we'll also interweave, if we can, on some of the other topics that are there as well. Yes, ma'am. Introduce yourself and tell us what you're going to hear.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Again, Shara Fisher-Jackson with the Cincinnati Preschool Promise, and mine is the easy, happy presentation, right? These are our fiscal year 23 actuals, our end of year results. That were presented to our Finance and Audit Committee as well as our Board of Managers. You will see something that looks a little bit different on here for the first time, and that is final expenditures that we did on our carryover budget. As you know, our shared carryover policy is that if we have within 5% of budget projections expended, then we do another supplemental budget that talks about how we do that. That is an opportunity for us to implement some pilot projects and other initiatives. So that's the new thing that you'll see on here. If you look where we ended up for the year, we had about $2 million below where we had anticipated being for our budget. And as you know, that goes into, again, the shared carryover pool. Our Finance and Audit Committee meeting this week did not have a quorum, but there was a very general discussion of securing and the responses to the RFP for our next auditor, which will be presented to the Board of Managers this coming Tuesday for approval.
Thank you very much.
And the other thing, thank you, Dr. Moffitt, for joining us at our annual meeting. I don't think I've been to this group officially since we released our impact report highlighting our results for 2023 and our annual report. Again, this also has our final finance report in here in terms of program spend, overhead spend, number of students served, and we're really proud to say it was a banner year where we had contact with almost 1,300 families. Tuition assistance numbers and enrollment were higher than ever. And you also see the graph that sees the progression of our quality improvement as well as where we still have quality gap neighborhoods as well. So
What page is that on?
that is in the annual report on pages 24 and 25, it shows our top enrollment neighborhoods. The quality gap neighborhoods have been reconfigured since when we started in 2016. We worked with innovations and community research to also look at which of those neighborhoods also had the greatest risk in terms of socioeconomic factors and other things. So the quality gap neighborhood map here shows not only those that do not have sufficient seats to meet all of the preschoolers in those neighborhoods according to 5-year ACS data, it also shows the neighborhoods that would benefit most from high quality preschool based on their SES status and at-risk neighborhoods. So that's how we prioritize what our spending is going to be and what our investment is going to be on the QI side, because what we know is that the children who have the most difficulties in facing the most challenges often benefit the most and have the best outcomes from high quality preschool. So that looks different than it looked in 2016, but as you can see, there's still a significant number of quality gap neighborhoods that need high quality seats, and they're identified as at risk and low supply, which are those neighborhoods in the orange.
I'd like to point out, nobody will be surprised, I saw this before, and I really do like the map. I want to emphasize this on the map. On page 24, it says CPP provider network. So is the map depicting only the providers? It's not depicting Cincinnati Public School.
I think you can see from the dots, there are CPS preschools that are listed in purples and the dots as well, because it says provider preschool affiliation. So it does include those CPS preschool sites as well. When we asked Innovations to do the overall calculation of what they said high quality seats were and available in the network, they did include those that were available based on our understanding of capacity at CPS sites as well. So this map does show community providers as well as CPS preschools, and you'll see those denoted by the purple dots.
But I could ask another question about it. So where we have the dots in the orange areas, you're showing our CPS preschools as well as the private providers.
Yes, the dots represent all of the preschools in the network with a differentiation for that, but the calculation was done based on the projections of ACS data, right? But we also know that not every child is going to attend a preschool, right? So we did use the calculation before where we knew there was a 100-seat or more gap is what we consider low supply.
And you know, even dating back to Greg Lansman and I meeting at the Fishes on Central Parkway after he came back from Denver, one of the issues was that in greater Cincinnati, you would never have 100% of our families partaking, no matter what we did. And that's choice, so that's fine. So on the numbers, I think this is very, very valuable. And where it's blue, we don't have this to show to the public, do we? Okay, we'll have to find a way to maybe get that posted, or where can they see this map?
We're happy to do that. We did, Innovations did it at one of our board meetings. We can send you the link to that because it's not only this map, but it's 5 plat maps that divide them so that you don't see them all connected in a snapshot. It'll show where we were, where we've moved to. It disaggregates so you see the quality gap neighborhoods or the at-risk neighborhoods as well. It has a clear definition of what we have as risk and the definition of low supply because it is also built on average. And, you know, I think Board Member Bolton, to what you're saying, no one in the country has 100% what they call uptake rate. I think additionally, we were very ambitious in saying those uptake rates could get as much as 74%. What we've seen nationally is for the first time ever, what we know is preschool enrollment is below 40%. And we were fortunate that because of the preschool promise having here, we didn't see that type of dip as well. Our goal in the strategic plan that we've built is that when we started the preschool promise, what we knew is we had a 19% enrollment rate of the eligible population in preschool. We have increased that this year to be 31%. Our goal by the end of 2025 is 35%.
Thank you. That's helpful. Any follow-up questions? Doctor?
So I think this is helpful, and I don't know if the public can see it, but I wish they could because this we are talking about in ad hoc boundaries. We're talking about all of this. And this map includes the CPS boundaries, it includes our district boundaries. We can kind of add this to what we're already preparing to talk about with regard to attendance boundaries and enrollment. You keep bringing up preschool enrollment. And so to look and see that Westwood, West Price Hill, East Price Hill, I guess really pretty much the west side is the desert for.
Well, I think it's important to recognize a couple of things, right? So we have all of these maps, and again, it may be beneficial to have a presentation from Innovations that goes through what all of these maps are, but also recognize what the limitations of this data is, right? It is our eligible population, so it is only students that are 300 FPL or below. There are only providers and seat availability of those who are participating in our provider network, of which about 45% of licensed providers do not participate in the Preschool Promise Network because they choose either not to accept children that have publicly funded childcare, right?
Okay.
The other picture in this snapshot is those students who may be attending who do not receive tuition assistance is an estimate for us, right? It is not a hard number because we don't have any means other than asking quarterly, as we do with attendance, to say how many students are in that space, of actually calculating the true number of students that are in attendance at that site. So those are only caveats that I wanted to make sure that people see in that. And when you see the disaggregated data and track with the ACS data, you can see that. It is our intention to work collaboratively, not only with our partners at 4C, but Success by 6 and United Way, to be very clear that we have a better snapshot and understanding of where all of our children are.
Gotcha.
They also have some mobility data as well that talks about trends they've seen from the last 2 years of preschool families moving in and out. And I think the other thing that is important to realize about this is the trend that most families only attend preschool within 2 miles or less of their home. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at how you expand those quality seats and where they are, it's important to recognize that as well.
Thank you for that context.
Thank you. And I think it would be great to have a presentation. I think that would be great. And also to Dr. Moffat's point, too, it would be great for the district folks that are our experts about the enrollment and have been studying the enrollment and the enrollment boundary lines and whatever, to kind of superimpose and understand where we're coming from. I think that would be helpful. Appreciate it very much. And this is based on what year is it? On page 25?
So this is estimates from the 2021 5-year estimates of ACS data. And we will get you the exact dates on the map, but this is as of preschool provider locations. That helps, go right on. March 2023. Right? So we know there's flux in the market and things, but that was our best estimate as of March of this year.
And then the last thing that you mentioned, the idea of the percentage of families that participate and send their kids to preschool is what?
Hard to estimate that. We would have to work with ODJFS to kind of get that data as well, because as you know, ours is transaction driven. So we have the number of students who are receiving tuition assistance. That doesn't count all of the families that may be in that income level, but are in fact attending a high quality preschool, but have other sources of funding.
I think it would be a great number to put together. It says we begin to think in terms of renewal and other issues to actually see how much of a service is being rendered and choices that people are making.
Yeah, the challenge that I think that we would have is how do we get a composite number of that from private providers, small providers, independent providers, because they are very accustomed to supporting what we all tend to do is capacity, right? And the gap between capacity and actual and what that looks like.
Yeah.
Try. Probably successful or not successful, we'll at least make a try at it. All right, any other presentation from our partners in preschool?
Appreciate the opportunity as always to be here.
Absolutely. Glad you're here. With no other questions, Treasurer, did you have anything you wanted to say regarding this before we move to the CPS?
Just that the annual underspend, the $2 million, is deducted off of their budget for next year, because they just hold on to the cash, they don't return it to us, and then we reissue it again. So you, in September, you adopted the payment schedule. First payment's been made, the second one's due November 1st, I believe. And so, well, that's just how the process works.
Great. Thank you very much. Now for CPS. Do you have anything in particular to present? We good? Any additions?
Well, so Rob, you want to bring my PowerPoint up, please? So that you're ready to go to the next agenda item? Okay. So you had asked us to report on last dollar in. That's related to the preschool expansion.
Oh, yes.
So just to remind everybody that the $48 million levy that was approved in 2016 had a $15 million set aside to expand preschool that is shared between CPP and CPS according to the master agreement, and that's under renegotiation at this point. No, you're fine. So I created this table off of a massive spreadsheet that is shared between Vera Brooks' department and Kevin when he does the calculations for tuition assistance for CPS. So this is last year, fiscal year 23, on how we spent our money supporting preschool. Ms. Brooks, do you want to explain how the splits happen, the split fundings happen on the AM, PM on individual children?
So the easiest way to explain it is have a look at our federal. I'm sorry. Hello. The easiest way to look at a split funding is just look at the federal. So the federal Head Start funding is like for the 3 hours of instruction, academic in the morning, and then we match that with Title I funding in the afternoon because we are full day programs. So you can see with the split funding, in some classrooms for some students, we do split fund to then cover the academic piece and follow all grant guidelines within Head Start, our early childhood state grant, our expansion dollars, and our tuition collections, knowing that our expansion dollars are the last dollars in. We go up to 250% at family poverty level as far as our expansion dollars, not the 300. It was a board decision a while ago. So we do look at every family's family poverty level, and then we determine which is the best way to assist that family to fund that student for a full day preschool experience.
So the table on the right shows you the different fundings. So the table on the left shows you the different combinations of splits, AM versus PM, and the table on the right shows you the total for each grant. So the federal grant Head Start is $3.5 million, early childhood is 2.5. So adding all that up, we spend $9.9 million, and then the last dollar in from the general fund for those kids that qualify is 6.7 for a total of 16.5-ish million.
I could ask a question about that. So the 16 or so million is the dollars from multiple sources.
All sources, yes,
Including the preschool.
Yes, and including tuition that parents pay is 1.2 million.
Repeat that. That would be helpful. Just what you did right before that.
Okay.
Do that chart.
So the table shows by funding source. For example, the first line is Head Start, it's a federal grant. $3.5 million was spent last year supporting preschool education. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different grants that are used. In addition to what we collect from parents who don't qualify for tuition assistance, is we spend $9.9 million, and then last dollar in is the general fund preschool set-aside money of 6.7, and those are the students that qualify under the income provisions, for a total of $16.7 million.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So there's more money than what the public may anticipate based upon the voted amount of money from the preschool promise levy and renewal.
Yeah, so the master agreement, there was a concern, and the master agreement defined that we do not replace our previous funding sources with the general fund levy money. And so they wanted to ensure that we would continue to use those funding sources and max those out first before we started tapping into the general fund set aside money.
That was part of the original agreement and also what we told the voters.
That's correct. I think it might even be in the vision statement. Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Okay. But it's definitely spelled out in the master agreement, yeah.
Comments, questions? About last dollar in? All right. Any other items from preschool? Do you have the numbers, books of CPS?
That's what I was looking up currently. Across the board, in all our funding sources, we are at 1,960 kids. That is in all of our classrooms across the district and all funding sources.
Thank you. Any trends or projections or issues about enrollment? It's continuing to go up. I know it's that rolling enrollment that always is frustrating to the administration and the board. But
Yeah, we enroll all year long, so we still have seats available. Our family service assistants who at our hubs are the individuals who assist families to find a location and go through the enrollment process. We still have families enrolling every day. So we still have families that are walk-ins and setting appointments with us looking for a high quality spot. If we're not able to provide them if the classroom is full, then we offer other sites or other classrooms. If some of those classrooms are not their choice or not convenient for them, then we do work with CPP and other providers to say, well, this is available. So we are continually trying to meet the needs of every parent in our district.
that's great.
Just one kind of question on that line there, and I know this is part of our struggles with also figuring out from a budget standpoint, but I think also being able to track as we are thinking about our future and how we handle these things. Results kind of differ based on how long they've been at a location or like how much time they've had, before they were moving forward, or if you've gone through 2 or 3 different places because you've had relocation within your family and that type of deal. And so I don't know, is there any way that we look at that information as far as the number of locations a student might have been, or a number of, if they're consistently staying within a particular location?
We do track that through our Power School and our enrollment process. So we are working, I just put in a request actually this past week to our department, our evaluation department, to look at a variety of avenues of how many students have had 1-year experience, how many students have had a 2-year experience, how many of our students have rolled up into our kindergarten. We were averaging prior to the COVID, where our numbers changed, was around over 900. This past year, I believe it was close to 900 that we rolled up. So we are looking at those different avenues. If we have a family that, say, might live on the west side of town, but due to a family situation, has to find housing on the more central area of town, we assist that family with other open seats that they can go to, that a child is not missing a preschool experience. We do have all of our classrooms based on the federal guidelines. So we go with the highest standards of the federal guidelines. So if a child does have to transfer from one location to another location, then they are receiving the same quality and same instruction.
So I just wanted to refer you to, in the submitted financial reports that we do monthly. Kevin talks about the month prior. On slide 14, it tells you that 892 of the 1,960 something are benefiting from tuition assistance.
We brag on this all the time. I know that at least from other conferences and whatever, nobody in the state is doing as well as y'all are doing regarding preschool. No question about that. Important partnership and service. No other questions, unless you'd like to stay for our 6 hours.
That is such a kind offer on a rainy Friday, but we'll
It's like run, Forrest, run.
Now, even though committee members and their union folks that are here will probably worry about number 3 taking a long time, but this is a different kind of number 3 for 5-year forecast.
That's
for the
correct.
Treasurer.
So I was going to ask if you wanted the benefits update real quick so that Ms. Indalecio can go back on her merry way.
Stay since she came 45 minutes earlier. But we'll go to you, and then we'll go to her, and we also have a couple other quarter versions. So go for it.
For the 5-year forecast?
Yes.
Okay. So then I will turn it over to Mr. Ashley, who is our forecasting expert.
Uh-oh.
We'll tag team.
I tried to shirk that responsibility.
So, Rob, that's the a separate PowerPoint, yeah.
So, just going to hit a few things. The November forecast is kind of unique because the board has to approve it by the end of November. The last business meeting is November 9th, which will be before the next finance committee. So that's why we wanted to get some of the information in front of you and get some feedback at this point. And then obviously the board will get a more in-depth review. So you won't have to sit through a full process twice. So for today, the next slide, just some of the considerations that go into the forecast. Some of these things are things that the district can control, and some of them are things that the district can't control, either at the state level, you know, the markets, those kind of things. So just kind of wanted to hit those quickly. The first one talks a little bit about House Bill 187, which has passed the House. They're considering in the Senate. The key thing it would do is require county auditors to change their reappraisal values. Currently, they focus on the 1 year of sales. This legislation would make them do a 3-year average, which for the homeowner would hold down appraised values. Obviously, it could impact district revenues if that's the case. One of the things I've heard related to that is when it passed the House, it didn't have an emergency provision, which means it probably would not be passed till after the county has completed their reappraisal. And tax bills would be ready to go out at the beginning of the year. One of the proposals I heard was they may offer credit to homeowners later in the year. So we'll have to see how all that plays out. But I just want you to keep in mind that obviously that would impact our 5-year period. The other thing is the Fair School Funding Plan, which we've been talking about, you know, and they did continue the phase-ins. There'd be one more budget cycle where we are hopeful they would include those phase-ins again. The forecast period, it's kind of hard to think about this, but considering this year plus 4 years is actually going to hit 3 state biennial budgets, hard enough to get through one. So the one that was just passed will be 24 and 25. And we'll have another 26, 27, and then the last year will be in the 28, 29 cycle. So obviously a lot of things can happen in those processes, so just wanted to put that out there as well. Obviously, we're all aware of inflationary changes. We do try to build some of that in, but again, it's just a projection. Controlling one of the things, obviously, the district can have some control over, and so we're just putting that before you. The CLIF plan and revisions to that, again, we talked a lot about that. Student enrollment projections and how those end up once everything is reconciled with the state as you go throughout the year related to total enrollment as well as the categorical enrollments, because our funding for those students are based on what is approved and submitted through ODE. And then last, obviously, we'll have collective bargaining agreements come up during this cycle.
Can I just add something? So the difference in the funding formula that I'm not sure people clearly understand is that it uses a 3-year average to determine the base cost, but when they apply the base cost to the number of students, they're using current enrollment. So if in our processes, when we're submitting our student data, if there's any fatal errors because there's errors in the data, we don't get funded on those kids until we clean up the data. So we projected our 12 enrollments at 33,000-ish. And so that's what we're using in the forecast, because we're going to say we're going to clean up the data and get all of our funding. But on October number 1, our funding value was at 31,000. So it tells you that we have some work to do. And it's early in the cycle. They just switched over, and they don't start reporting until October through EMIS. But I just wanted to make everybody aware that enrollment changes they used to hit us like a year later and on a 3-year trend. So a decline would have a smaller impact in the next year. But right now we're being impacted this year for this year's kids. I just want to make that as a significant change.
Thank you.
The next slide is, so this is to kind of give you a higher level summary. I realize it's still a lot of detail on this slide. But along with that, you actually have the more detailed, sorry, I hit the microphone, breakdown. So a couple things I wanted to point out here. So what we did in this first version is we left the CLIF dollars that we had originally projected to come back in 25. Some of those are coming back as one-time expenses and some are coming back as recurring. Now I know through the process, you guys are, the board and superintendent and treasurer are working on updating that. But what we're reflecting right now is what we had previously thought the CLIF dollars coming back would be. Very good.
Right. So in May, the estimate was $28 million of recurring costs in ESSER. But as we went through May, June, and July, August to balance the budget, that's what grew to that $86 million recurring that we shared with the board last Saturday, or at the board workshop. And then some of that is down to $65 million with the superintendent's work. So we haven't.
What work is that?
That was that. Remember the document that she shared, the CLIF tracker, where she showed the different scope of how things could be reduced. So that $86 million has been temporarily or draft recommended as a $65 million challenge. We haven't used that new data in this forecast because none of that's been agreed to yet. So
I'm just making that very, very
yes,
clear to the world and God and everybody
right.
else.
So that's why the forecast, we stuck with what we did in the public in May in terms of the CLIF, but then the second version.
I appreciate the work, but yeah, okay.
So we did not want to use any of these new values until the boards finished their conversation, but we have to do something and have a 5-year forecast adopted by the end of November. Okay. So we're going to have a conversation about what assumptions we're going to use in the forecast. We also provided a second forecast that shows the expenditures matching the revenues, and then what that does to the cash balance. So go ahead, keep going, Kevin.
Sure. So one of the key things I wanted to point out on this slide is the yellow numbers. So that is why when we file the forecast, ODE or Department of Workforce or whoever it will be at that point reviews.
Probably governor personally.
So they review the balances at that point if they're negative. So that's current year plus 2 additional years. If they see the negative, then it creates a what is your plan to avoid that.
Right.
In year 4 and 5, it's understandable, you know, to see negatives there. So that doesn't trigger their interest. But so those are the numbers, the 19.9 million. And if we had a renewal in 26, we had renewal dollars, that would change what they look at there. You'll see there's 23.3 million and 46.5 million listed for 27-28. That is a half-year collection on the preschool renewal, or the preschool, that levy.
That $48 million levy.
That renewal, the 23.3, is approximately a half-year collection. And then the next year is a full-year collection, the 46.5. That's what it's projecting out. The renewal will be on the ballot in November of 25, just to kind of remind everyone about that, because we will do that essentially a year early, give us time if we need to.
And there has been some discussion about that renewal, would it be the same amount or whatever, but yes, let's say it's the same amount for the benefit.
So what this is showing you is if the revenues play out the way they're forecasted, and they tend to be fairly accurate, it's like 98% level, and then the expenditures play out with the inflationary estimates and step increases and the $28 million ESSER coming back, 25 would be $658 million, and that would push us into a cash deficit if we allowed our expenses to grow to that. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay, and then I'll go to the next slide. The key thing I'll show here at the bottom is, as the treasurer mentioned, in the green, we're keeping the expenditures the same, but then we're taking into account advances in and out. You'll see that on both sides. Those basically offset their timing issues. But the projected reductions, so these would be the amounts that would need to be reduced in each year in order to create the bottom line, which would be maintaining cash. So the projected cash at the end of this year would be 31.6. If those expenditures were adjusted, we would maintain that balance throughout the period. Again, highlighting the yellow, what ODE would see would have the 31.6.
So
No, I was just waiting for a question.
So the challenge, or the question, not the challenge, the question is, we know that if we show a deficit at the wrong year, we have to, that ODE gets involved, and more particularly, we have to write a letter and a strategy as to how we're going to overcome that. But don't we have to report honestly what it is rather than anticipating work, or how's this going to play out without, by us being transparent, but also not shooting ourselves in the foot? How are you handling this?
So that's why we want to have this conversation today. So a forecast is a forecast, and it's your best guess of what's going to happen based on history, formulas, and what you know was coming. We as an organization need to determine together what rules we want to follow on our estimated expenditures. So what I mean by that is, we've deliberately allowed our budget to be greater than our annual revenue source for a couple of years because we were investing in strategic plan issues, and we knew that we had cash on hand to help cover that. We don't have that space anymore, and so we have to return back to a real balanced budget to the estimated revenues without inserting new money somehow.
I have a question.
Member Moffitt.
I'm with you in that we invested in the strategic plan prior to right around the pandemic-ish time. Yes. Mm-hmm. Then additionally, I remember hearing we've also been very generous as the new superintendent came into the district to allow for certain expenses as well. Is that right? I remember hearing that before, that last year we also allotted generously in spending as well.
For some new initiatives for the superintendent, and specifically around high school transformation and the goals and guardrails, yes.
I have a question. I just have to form it, but it's coming. I promise it's coming. I'll
come back.
Okay, it'll be there.
Don't have to worry, yeah.
And so, I think part of this is a recognition that we've been having this discussion for a while around what we have spent in the world of COVID that we did not spend pre-world of COVID, right?
Correct.
And so that means that there are some things that we, it's like we're going to have a discussion more than likely also around other things like facilities and all the other things that we have to still also pay for that we'll have fair things for. But this is really about the district has expanded what we provide and what we do and the resources that we've allocated in our budget. And now at some point we kind of have to figure out what is the best way to get us in a fiscal order to balance the budget, right? Like we're not, in some ways we're talking about what things are we going to have to make a tough decision on and what things are we not. And so I think the question becomes of how do we as a board want to prioritize our forecast are we going to commit to doing some of those decisions, or are we going to ask that we kind of go at an even level or some other level, right?
Right. So the question, the guidance that we're seeking is, do we want the November forecast to reflect the standard way we've been forecasting, estimating as if we weren't going to make this a balance, or do we want to say, does the board want to commit to a balance to revenue and show that as a forecast?
That's a tough question too, because the reality is that it's easy to say we're going to do it. Another thing on the reality to what that means.
Correct.
No, go ahead.
My concern is not to be afraid of having to do a letter to ODE. And I'm right now, and it could be different in an hour, more afraid to ever communicate to the district that what the district saw at the Saturday morning meeting is already in play, because it's not. The numbers might be there, but all the lists of possibilities, nobody said anything about any of that. So
correct.
It's a choice about being more afraid of the ODE piece, or being more afraid of sending the wrong communication internally while we're going to be asking people to make certain cuts or rearrangements or whatever. You don't want to have a bad discussion, because this is going to be one of the most important couple of months that we'll ever have. But also, I think Hamilton County people here can't help myself. I think it's probably more than reasonable to commit to the amount and say we've got to do this. So those are three things. But committing to an amount does not mean that we are committing to any of the priorities or whatever we saw.
Exactly.
So I'm comfortable making a commitment to a number, but I don't want anybody to even think that any of that has been determined or even fully discussed. We had 42 minutes of seeing the documents. And thank God we saw that. So is that correct? Is we're making a commitment about the number, but it's not making sure that we're not that afraid of ODE, but we're also not wanting to send out the wrong message to the district.
Correct. So that's what we're asking. Are we agreeing to a number now for the forecast? And then we're still figuring out how we're going to get to that number, but we're still committed to that number. Versus, do we just let the traditional inflationary costs play out and show that need, the impact to the cash balance? So that's what we're asking, not the detail. I only brought up that's 28 Mississippi because 28 is what we had in the spring, and I wanted to explain why it wasn't.
No, don't say that Monday night.
We're not presenting Monday night unless you want me to.
I know. No.
In order to have this full board conversation.
Yes.
Can you share with me? I'm kind of stuck, and this is only 3 of 7, so I get it. But I want us to be transparent with ODE and the community. But I also want to understand timeline. And you mentioned that we have to report by a certain date. So, and I also want to understand consequences. So can you share with me if we were to start with the number or to start with the first version where it's showing a deficit and decide, okay, because the deficit doesn't really start until, maybe this is a little manipulative, but it does start in 25, but it's not definite yet. So if we were to start with the projection, the version 1, but then change that after the deadline, what are the implications there?
We would just file a new forecast. But if we show version 1 with a deficit in 25, ODE will send us the letter and say, give us a written plan. that the superintendent and the treasurer have to sign together. And creating a new levy is not an acceptable answer, right?
No.
We can't just say we're going to go for new money.
We have to wait.
So once we do that plan and we make those agreements and make those changes, we can file a new forecast at any time.
Okay.
You can always update your forecast, but we're required at least twice a year, and by November 30 and by May 31. Every school district in the state of Ohio, all 16 or 613 of us have to do that, and we have to use the same format.
So we could, in essence, file the version 2 that shows balance, and then say, "Hey, we've renegotiated this, and we found X." We could do that. Yes.
Yeah. So if we were going to do that, I would want to make sure that the notes say that we are coming up with this reduction plan, and so that we are being fully transparent. That we don't have it figured out yet. We're working through it, but at least there's a commitment to balancing to that number.
And then would they hold us with the same level of accountability with the balance, but to say, "Hey, we're coming up with something," and then we could say a levy is proposed and that be acceptable?
I think as the forecast shows a lack of a deficit, they won't respond to it.
Just and one other question, and I think it's important for folks maybe to understand in this, at least as I'm understanding you, the purpose of the forecast is for us to communicate to ODE or whoever we now are communicating with up at the state level, that we...
It's the governor's wife. I'm in charge.
Oh, you know. But
turn off my mic.
It's a fair point. But that we have a plan to be fiscally sound as a school district. And so to a certain extent, what we put in our forecast, and I'm sure what we've done in the past, what we put in our forecast is not always what we end up doing in that same sense, because there are other things that may come in, right? You may get additional revenue. You may get things that may change as you update and clarify in May, right? Like that's part of the purpose is that you know, when we did our first forecast, we did not predict that we were going to get 20 additional million out of, and then we did, so we update and that type of deal. So I think, isn't that kind of the point of the forecast, that you're supposed to
Right.
revisit?
So there's three major reasons for the forecast. One is to inform ODE about our solvency. That's one. Two is to report to the public about our solvency. And three is to help us with future financial planning, right? So forecasts are forecasts. They're estimates on your best information that you have at the time. You know, we didn't forecast that the state would pull $8 million back from us when COVID hit, right? So things happen that are unanticipated, and so that's why they're just the best estimates.
One point I would make too, there was an instance 2 or 3 years ago where the forecast did show a negative in year 3, and we went through that process. The thing that helped us in that case was we did the May forecast. The state changed the budget in June and showed that we were getting some additional money, and I think that was ultimately the explanation. We were able to revise the forecast based on that new money that came after we had submitted it. Now, I don't necessarily see that happening in this case, but just to give you some history, that was one of the things that did happen before.
Any further questions about the forecast, since we now know what the issue is?
So when do you need a response by the board? You're not going to bring this on Monday, but do we need to be having this conversation?
Well,
it is now. My question was, when do you need a response from the board?
So probably Monday night, because there's only one board meeting in November to get it adopted, right? So we need to know the direction in order to come back and do a full presentation. So we can, I can do this Monday night. I don't think there's any presentations on the agenda for Monday night, so.
Thank God.
What I would like to see on Monday night is not the slides, but the issue.
Okay.
The actual issue that needs to be discussed.
Okay.
I don't think the board necessarily on Monday night needs to, I mean, they can have the handout, but I would say it's much more important to explain the dilemma.
Got it.
Or Is that fair? In order to have the board be able to discuss it rather than all the numbers? How do you feel? Tell us what you think.
I mean, I think it is important to discuss what we are actually doing. I think that is fair. I think it doesn't hurt, though, to recognize that if we don't do it, these are what we would be reporting as far as deficit goes, or at least ranges of that deficit or the potential issues with it. You know, again, it doesn't need to be the full-on chart of every little line of every line. Probably not. Maybe like the top bottom number type idea.
What I do, I just do one slide that has option A and option B, and then the
Yeah.
I disagree. I'm going to tell you. This is a very succinct report. It's not 15 slides with 13 of them being creative. It's succinct. And I need to see the numbers. I already don't think that everybody fully understands school finance. And I think that seeing it this way with 25, 26, 27 is impactful to see version 1 and version 2. I just think that maybe not necessarily slide 2, but to see which version are we wanting and the consequences of each version is important. And the explanation to me is far more important than the visual, but the visual is important because we have multiple styles of learners.
So we'll start with the slide of option A and option B, and then we can go into more details as things come up.
If people have questions, but I do think that this is very clear. It's to the point, and some people need it this way.
I think that's fair, and making sure we're representing all 7. I mean, I think it's reasonable to do what you're suggesting. I would say, though, I think it's important to frame what the discussion has to be.
Yeah, that's important.
And because we're not agreeing to whatever is being presented. It's a discussion that we have to have. I will say, definitely, the board will want to be transparent. As you said, like you emphasized, no matter what we do, the footnotes have to read this.
Right.
So I think there's unity about that, especially if we're looking into the near future and going back to the voters at any time soon or what have you. So if that's enough, we are moving on from 5-year forecast to 2 of our shorter presentations. We have benefits, and we also have a presentation, but discussion and an inquiry, perhaps, from Clifton Town Meeting. So that some.
We'll overstate it. It's not a
Want some
presentation.
money too. So go ahead and start with benefits.
Good morning. I wanted to return again this month to talk about our benefits update. As you're aware from last month, we went through an audit last year, an internal audit. The benefits department did, which was a follow-up from the one that was done in 2020. There were several findings, and as a result, our management response to those findings are really threefold. They're bucketed into 3 categories. One is the hiring of a benefit analyst, someone who can specialize in the data around benefits, looking at reconciliations, validations, verifications, making sure that what we're billed is what we should be paying, and that every head is covered and heads that shouldn't be covered aren't paid for. So that role, we have posted that internally and externally. We've interviewed 7 people for that job, and we should have a decision made on that next week, and hopefully an offer made next week and accepted. Cross your fingers for us. And then the second bucket of management response is around an RFP. This is probably the biggest one, certainly the most expensive. And the RFP was around benefit management. So how is it that we want to take this work and really outsource a lot of the management of benefits, as would other companies kind of our size do routinely? And so we did an RFP this summer. We have narrowed the focus to the company. The committee went through the process, and we scored those out, interviewed, done several follow-ups, and so now we're in contract negotiations with that company in terms of working out pricing and scope of work. And then finally, processes was kind of a general bucket, but it was just this whole idea of really creating processes that are documented, that are defined, that are tested. And so that work continues with the benefit committee, working on a couple of those every month and testing those. We have added a link to the spreadsheet that we work and follow through with the internal auditor so that they have open access to those as well. So we're testing those and then hope to conclude that work by February. Right now, the benefits department is really busy getting ready for, in conjunction with financial technology, getting ready for open enrollment. Open enrollment happens October 30th to November 15th, and we do that with a Business Plus system. We move to this, if the RFP and the contract finalizes, that will go to another platform next year. That'll be really easy, user-friendly for our employees. I think it'll be yield a quick win.
Thank you. Questions? Additions from the treasurer? My one question, first of all, again, we're hiring people when we're also talking about, making these cuts, but this has been a long effort regarding benefits, going back to our audit committee folks and what have you, and for almost 3 years now, if I recall. The question I have is this RFP and the question of outsourcing or insourcing. Does that impact the removal of current staff?
That's
Would be lost the jobs or lost positions because we're thinking about outsourcing, or?
No, that was not the plan. The plan was that our current employees would stay in place and pivot their work a bit to lean in more on the customer service piece, that the management of benefits would really involve, so that would be, the company, if we outsource, would be less involved with dealing with individuals and be more on the back end of that. So it wouldn't necessarily do that. I will say, though, that the whole purpose of doing that is because we want to lower our risk. So the risk out there in terms of financial risk has been higher than it should be, as was uncovered in the audit. And I think that we could really look to what would the reduction in risk be from a fiscal standpoint throughout these processes.
The risk, we go to Miss Risk over there.
I was just about to ask.
Report about the benefits risk, just that you kind of have outlined for the audit committee. I mean, a couple of sentences.
Absolutely. And I think Ms. Indilizio did a good job about highlighting the highest and most prominent risk is that we want to ensure we are covering those folks, our employees and their families, who are paying for those benefits. And that's the biggest thing that we found through our work, is that the system, we lacked process, we lacked controls, we lacked understanding of the data, so we could not determine with any sort of fidelity if that main question and main objective was true. And so really that's what management is tasked with now, is defining clear processes, setting clear owners, and then also second levels of oversight to review and report out with integrity that those things are in fact happening. So that is our hope, and we, as Ms. Indilizio said, we are working closely with her team to get these bi-monthly updates that we report in our dashboard to our audit committee as well. So I would say in short, that is really the key, and I think the key objective of their work as they move forward.
That's our community audit committee. Member Moffitt?
So I'm just going to say for the record, I really am struggling with hiring people in a time when we're talking about cuts. I'm just going to say that just seems a little odd to me. So I go to our treasurer, our internal auditor, just for the public's knowledge. You report directly to the board. You're one of 3 direct reports to the board, the superintendent and the treasurer. So has there been, and I said this at the last board meeting that we had at Aiken, in your audits, is there any review of efficiency of the processes? I'm wondering because it was stated that we're talking about outsourcing and asking some of our current staff to do more or to pivot. I think that's the word. So have we looked at efficiency of processes with what we currently have and where we could, in effect, save money or reduce duplication of services or be more efficient before we're looking outward to hire or to outsource, specifically with regard to benefits, because that's an area. But I'm really looking more towards HR because we're talking about hiring for those positions. And I just don't, I'm confused as to how we can efficiently do that and be fiscally responsible.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's speak to the scope that we spent most of our time with the benefits audit, as that's what I'm most familiar in. Recommendations we made when we did the audit in fiscal 2020, and again when we completed it this past fiscal year, is that there need to be clearly defined processes, even just documenting what do we currently do, and that really was the foundational ask from both audits. As auditors, when we come in, that's our first question: is what is the lay of the land? What are you currently doing? So that way we can, in effect, assess efficiency as to whether things are working most appropriately, as well as controls. So that, unfortunately, is an area that has been found inefficient or ineffective or non-existent to some degree, to the extent that we would expect for us to be able to make those types of conclusions. So the lack of process documentation is concerning from an operational standpoint, of course, as to what do the folks who are tasked with these roles do on a day-to-day basis. What do we do if they were to leave and someone else were to need to pick up the work? And then from an assessment standpoint, how do we truly assess what's going on if we kind of get various verbal descriptions without us all having a consensus on what's truly happening? And so I think that's where we've partnered with HR and benefits to say we really need to mark out where we currently are, where your team is currently operating, as well as what's your future state. So that way you can have that guiding map to say, yes, there are opportunities for efficiency as we see everything laid out. And ultimately, that new state process includes those efficiencies. So without those foundational documents and things in place, it's really difficult for us to say we're being efficient. However, I think the plan from management, as I understand it, in adding this HR benefit analyst is to do a lot of this work in understanding the data reconciliation, because that's where we really fell short in being able to make a solid conclusion, was that the data was not reliable. And so having someone, I believe, on their team, and their intent is for that person to really own and understand that and take it to that next step. So that's my understanding of, and I certainly will defer to our management team, but that's why we were only able to get to kind of on the precipice of saying, are we effective? And the short answer is, I can't say that we are if we don't have the documentation to support it.
Yeah, that answers my question. So, I do have one more. I'm sorry. So what would we, if we were to want that information, how do we, and I'm looking at you because you're the historian here, how do we as a board request to have our auditor conduct an audit on efficiencies of our processes so that we could see where additions need to be made versus outsourcing in this time that we're talking about budget?
Board together, like any other assignment, can make that assignment, because it's not an exclusive kind of assignment, meaning something that we would rather not, or something that needs for credibility's sake be made in a different way, but I'd like an assignment by the whole board.
Okay.
To the auditor. I think we have to also understand the role of the internal auditor, and the whole board has to, as to the purpose. But the first question is, have you done something like this already, and what already is on the books that the audit committee already knows about, or finance knows about, or what have you? But yes, it would be like any other assignment, and there are opportunities to assign the internal auditor at a different time, but it would be the board.
Okay.
It would be a board assignment. Yes.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, just as we think ahead. So as I just said, the short answer is, have we assessed efficiencies? And my quick answer is, we cannot assess efficiency without documented process. So my understanding of where things currently are, based on the Council of Great City Schools benchmarking and review report that came out, is that there is a lot of work to do in just that sense of defining roles and the processes themselves. So I would just caution us from a timing standpoint, that it would be most effective for us to come in once that has been documented, because otherwise we're going to do what I just said. We're going to come in and we're going to ask for it. And then really it's, best that we step away until that's developed. So I think that might help from a timing perspective. And then as we look at planning, our annual internal audit plan is on a fiscal year. So perhaps if management were to create those come, let's say, next summer, this upcoming summer, we can incorporate that in our fiscal 25 audit plan as well.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah, so just kind of two questions, part two, and this goes a little bit more to Ms. Indelicio. And I think one of the things you're talking about in adding this potential position, love alliteration there, and also adding or taking these system aspects of it out of the role is to, in fact, help folks who are having the struggles or who may have questions get those things answered in a more efficient and effective time frame. Because I think part of the problem that we are experiencing and that the audit committee or the audit report noted was that when there's an inconsistency in people's results, that also means that folks aren't getting those services or getting more services than they should. And so in some ways, it's to get us to that status point where we can say that's effectively this person's getting what they're supposed to get, when they're supposed to get it, and if they're not, we can address it in a quick and timely manner, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's exactly what we want to be. I mean, we want to have, we want to know that if we're covering 11,022 heads, that's something we're paying for, not 23, not 21. Like, we really want to make sure that those numbers look alike. We also want to be able to hold our vendors' feet to the fire to make sure that they can give us reports that have unique identifiers so that we can match up our claims data to exactly what who we're covering, to make sure that you don't have someone that's, I mean, we check the reports every day about people who have aged out of coverage. That doesn't mean they didn't go to the doctor with their card, right? And so it's possible that claim can get through unless we're checking those. So we need to check unique identifiers, certainly cleaning that up, working with our vendors to get them to create the kind of reports that we need to ensure that we are paying for exactly what we're supposed to be paying for and that our employees are covered. So what we don't want is for an employee to have a sick kid, take them to a children's hospital, and they're like, they're not covered.
Yeah.
And the person's like, I thought I was. They may not have signed up for family coverage. There may be some stopgaps in there that we can help with. We can solve some of those on the spot, and we do all the time. However, we don't want to we don't want to be firefighters. We want to be strategists, and so we want to really work more in that arena where we are thinking ahead and thinking, how is it that we can best serve our population? Benefits are a big reason why people work for us. I mean, frankly, we offer excellent benefits. As a recruiter, I'm out on the recruiting line all the time, telling people about our wonderful benefits, that CPS is not just a great city to live in, it's not just a great district. We also, as an employee, make sure that you're covered and your family's wrapped in services and that you can be well with us.
And then second question real quick, and I think this is probably an easy answer to that. When our processes don't work, or if we're paying for extra people that we shouldn't be paying for, or we're not paying for others, it ends up costing us more in the end. As a district, right?
It could. And so that's I feel like I'm channeling Lauren, because the problem is we had trouble finding whether it did or not, because the reporting we're getting from Anthem was not great in terms of unique identifiers. But the assumption is, yeah, we could definitely be paying more. We could be paying more on a claim that if you go to get injections in your knee and someone actually codes that as a knee replacement, we could not be, it's possible those things don't get caught. And so just as that's a small example, so for the benefit management team that would come in, they would look through every single claim and make sure that they are at the right price point, and can also save us a lot of money that way, probably the cost of the contract, quite honestly. And so yes to all of that. Yes, we want excellent service for our employees. I mean, many of us here are employees, and we've appreciated the good service that we have and the good coverage that we have, and we want to continue that. And we want to continue that in such a way that that work goes on without regard to who are in those spots, what people are in those spots, which goes to the idea that we have to do a good job with documenting processes. The superintendent is, we've all heard her talk about that in the importance of process documentation. And as some of you know, I've stepped into this role a year ago, and we've been working really hard on process documentation across the whole HR scope, because that was a piece that is a gap. And so it just takes a while to iron those out, but we certainly are doing that work.
Last question or comment regarding benefits, President Sellers?
One of the things that I want to bring up is I think that the benefits department has been really very understaffed for the last probably 20 years, and that they are not always on top of everything because there's just too much work for one manager and one clerical to manage all of that. There are people who, sometimes it's the clunky system that we have where people don't get a receipt back. So that whole department really needs to be upgraded and have better documentation so employees know what it is that they're paying for. I mean, there's somebody in the room now who was overpaid a family plan when they were supposed to be a single plan, but they didn't know because costs went up and they didn't realize that that's what they were doing. So it's really hard to go back and make those corrections, but because they're short staffed. So whatever we do, I think we need to have more people working within the department for healthcare.
Thank you for sharing that. And we'll move on from benefits, and we will go to our guest, Mr. Ogilvy.
Yes,
correct?
Ogilvy, yes.
Ogilvy. Okay, good. From Clifton Town Meeting, and
Yes.
share with us what you thought from Clifton.
Has the board seen the letter with the map that I emailed? Can I give you
I have no-
papers?
I haven't. Yeah, please do.
Okay.
When did you email it?
Oh, it just came to Eve maybe a couple of days ago. Take the whole packet. Take the whole packet.
I got you.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I got you.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. I think so thank you for having me. I'm here mostly.
Well, the microphone is.
Is it working? Is it
That's
working?
great.
Okay. I'm here mostly because I'm a parent. I have 3 kids at Fairview Clifton German Language School. We love it. We walk to school every day, and it's very dangerous. It's very scary if my little, kindergartner walking to school, and he's, but other than that, it's really great. But so the danger of kind of crossing our street, walking to school, got me involved in, paying attention to local transportation issues maybe about 2 years ago. A little anecdotal story is I dropped the kids off at school. This was last year. And coming out of the building, and I hear a big boom. And right in front of Fairview, a car's flipped over and is sitting on its roof. And where we had crossed literally 5 minutes ago. So this got me again. I'm kind of really attuned to how bad, kind of the streets are. And I don't mean to imply that, Clifton is actually worse than a lot of other streets. They're all kind of, people drive too fast and nobody pays attention to little kids. But what's happened recently is, the Department of Transportation has decided that they're going to redesign Clifton Avenue. So Clifton, they're going to start basically right there by Hughes High School at McMillan, and they're going to go north to just north of Ludlow. So on the third page of your little thing, the board docs, there are a little map just with a highlighted. They're going to rethink that entire street, redesign that. They are not planning to redesign the portion where Fairview and Cairns sit side by side.
Stopping.
They're going to correct. They've not, we the community group, Clifton Town Meeting, have asked them, and the best we could do is, and so I'm sorry, we'll back up one more step. They've got an RFP out for Clifton Avenue for this redesign. They did agree to add an alternate to that RFP for the portion of Clifton Avenue between Ludlow and basically Cairns. So it's the scope that they're committed to is about a half mile, but they added an alternate that if we come up with funds, the community comes up with funds, they will redesign the portion north between Ludlow and I'm going to say Cairns because that's essentially where it stops. So that's why I'm here today. I think I'm asking for the board's support to help us fund, DOTE would do that. They would do the study that we're funding. What we're funding would be a design study. It's community engagement. They work with the community, all the stakeholders on the street, and say what is wrong with the street, how could it be better, and they come up with conceptual designs. So that's what we're trying to get done here. Then DOTE takes those conceptual designs and gets construction funding and redoes the street. So I've been doing this really just 3 years, but I can say that the Department of Transportation has a lot of problems, a lot of streets, and getting them to kind of completely rethink one and redesign it is very unusual. They don't do this very often. There's a lot of lane miles here that they've and they tend to do piecemeal solutions. So for us to have the opportunity to kind of rethink the street and make it work for everyone who's on there, make it safer, make it more accessible, is a big opportunity. And I think if we let them just do this one portion of Clifton Avenue, we'll kind of miss. It's a miss for the community. So I'm asking for the board's support in whatever way you can to help us get this street study completed.
So I apologize. I just saw this. So I've been trying to listen to you and skim and think at the same time. Sometimes that's a challenge. So has the city, because I know the city comes out and they also do evaluations. They did this for me on Glenwood. They told me that I needed to go out and mark the speed of the cars by the park.
Yep.
But I know that they do come out and do that sort of stuff. Is the Department of the DOTE the city DOTE?
Yes, that's right.
So
Yes.
they're saying that you have to pay, that the Clifton Town meeting would have to pay for them to come out. And is that what they're saying?
We've done a lot of little piecemeal solutions already. There's been a lot of they've got the center line hardening things on the street. There's a lot of little piecemeal solutions that have happened. DOTE is committed to a redesigns, which would be basically they're going to rethink the whole street. They're going to maybe shrink it. They're going to change lanes. They're going to add bike lanes, whatever they decide to do, right? A big rethink of the street. That's what they're planning to do for the portion by Hughes up to Ludlow.
Right.
They're thinking to ignore the portion north of Ludlow because although it is Fairview and Cairns, there's Annunciation School is right there. There's 2 or 3 churches, daycares, there's a rec center, but there's really no big institutions. The reason they're working south of Ludlow is primarily UC's dissatisfied with what the street is.
Okay. Makes sense now. Now it's all coming together. So okay. So but just so that, because the public doesn't have this, so the estimated cost of the study is $50,000. The grant application is $30,000, and the gap is $20,000.
That's correct.
So I'm just confused that they're wanting to charge for the study. Like, that just is amazing to me that they're charging $50,000 to do a study for an area that includes a school.
DOTE will contract the study out. So they have an RFP right now. When we get the results of that RFP, then we'll know the actual cost. The range they gave us was 25 to 50. We latched onto the 50 number so we would have confidence we could get it done.
Sure, I got you. Okay, that was my question.
I mean, I would like to say I'm surprised that this is how the Department of Transportation works, but I'm not extraordinarily surprised. Because they have a committed space that they were looking at, and this is beyond a committed space, and so that's what they have typically done when folks want it outside of their area that they're already looking at. I do think, I think it may be, the one thing I would maybe want to also just kind of figure out is what that amount ends up being, and I think that's the only thing I would raise the concern to, is what we would then be committing to as a district, like language-wise, because I think we want to make sure, because I think you put it in the statement here about that this is contingent on both getting the grant and the amount being whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I think that just make sure whatever language that we would put in would reflect that idea. I also think it's just important that we're very clear about what that would mean from a district budget end of where those funds would kind of have to come from or whatnot. But I don't think it's unreasonable to say because of we have 2 schools right in the area that again, I've sat down there and manned the polls right across the street for the fun of that, because people pull across the street to the church parking lot to take their kids across on a regular basis, which also seems to be like maybe that might be something that we figure out. But it's maybe neither here nor there on how we get in and out of the school. But I think that it's a fair thing for us to be invested in. I just want to make sure that we put the steps in place to ensure that we're doing it the right way. Because the other thing I would hate for us to have done is that if there's not a conversation or not something that could be further pressed with the city to fully support it or fully sponsor it or fully fund it from us, that we haven't taken that opportunity up also. So, I mean, I want to make sure we do it right, but I don't see a reason why we could not be invested in some way or fashion into the conversation.
I agree with you. I think I was just thinking let's call some of these city council people and tell them pay for that.
Yeah, let's
Yes, that's a good one.
Let's clear this. So let's really clear this up. This is about the city of Cincinnati doing a study about commercial and also some residential areas along this street. And it stops when it gets to the schools.
It stops at Lobo, right about a half mile before the schools.
It's actually by Wolfer and Clifton has been a real problem.
Yep.
A very real problem. And the pedestrian problem you're talking about, even the side streets. I can remember Chris Nelm's mother was a crossing guard right there by Old Clifton School.
They work hard, man, those crossing guards.
It's terrible. So you're asking us to find a way to think about money, maybe, or to think about finding a way, to your point that you started to think about, calling or dealing with the city to say, excuse us, but you've got a community that wants you to do this, and we're talking about collaboration, and this is between 20 and 50,000. You want us to help you with a street design plan?
Yes, we would love any support you can give. I have talked to Mark Jeffries about this. I've talked to several people at the Department of Transportation. The guy whose mind needs changed is John Brzezina, the director there.
There's 6 people on there, thank you.
That's who we are
6.
talking to. So, well, go ahead.
So any support you can give, and I would really love for the city to kind of do their job and fund this thing themselves. We've asked in all the ways I know how to ask. That the answer's been we just don't have the money, and I do get it. The DOT doesn't have a lot of money. I think we have a grant pending on this that could fund the whole thing. Having CPS support or even in any capacity with this grant would probably help our application.
That's what because if we sign something 3 years later, somebody cites it to serve their own purposes, as we found out in the West End. So we need to take to the board the idea of supporting your request for a grant. We also need to do some politicking regarding the city, and then the last resort would be going to the treasury of our district, the money, where it's held in the golden chest, and try to figure out money to support this. But you make a strong case, and this is very, very important.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Would Safe Routes to School funding, I don't know, is there any funding in that area? Do we have a grant for that?
We did, and we gave millions to the city some years ago, and not all of it got spent.
So
And
perhaps I
that's
was
cool.
just wondering if maybe there were some grants or something
be.
that we could tie it to.
We can ask the grant writer to do some research.
That would be great.
There we go.
Is that okay for- We're on it.
Thank you.
Mr. Ogilvy.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Let me text them right
I was texting right
We
now.
need a damn.
Yeah, and Mark
some
was
money.
up there when we got an event up at Cannes, and we looked right at it, and he said, yeah, but the study's only gonna take us to here. What? There's hundreds of children. Hundreds of children.
There's 3 preschools and 3 schools.
Thank you.
And a rec
And a rec center, and they stop after we get to the business, I got it. This is a classic.
Yeah.
Somebody's priorities are screwed up. All right, we're gonna move ahead, and we're on to some more easy stuff. Jen, can you take us through the 2 policies real quick, and then we'll go to the CRA stuff. Let's do some of those. Those are very quick.
So the policies are linked in the slide stack. I have them all in order. Hold on, I'll tell you what page. Towards the end, I think. Slide 28. You also have hard copies of 2 new policies. Well, I think they're new. One on the gifts and donations to the district, and the other one on fundraising, crowdfunding.
And that's policies waiting for us to pass on this after the treasurer presents.
Right. So there's been a team that's worked on this. We separated them into 2 separate policies because fundraising is so incredibly complicated, and legal counsel's been with us, and I don't know, 10 or 1,200 other people. So I don't know. Do you want me to read it through, or do you want to read it and then come back, or?
Maybe you can just give us kind of a high level of what's in, or what we should be
Yeah, so our
paying
current,
attention to.
our current practice is that any money that's donated to the district or gifted to the district goes to the treasurer's report, and the board accepts it in the treasurer's report in a public board meeting. And then we put it in the proper fund that it belongs, right? Depending on what the donor indicates the purpose of the donation is. That's the first policy. And there's a recommendation, if you see on that second paragraph, that there's a blank line.
Mhm.
Legal counsel was suggesting that we maybe put like a floor value there to say that anything under $1,000 doesn't need to go through board acceptance, you know. I'm a little uncomfortable with that. So I would prefer to just say all of them go through, and that way everybody, it's very transparent, everybody's very aware of the amount of the donation and the purpose of the donation, and then we can monitor better the spent to making sure that we're in compliance with the purpose. So that would be my recommendation on, and we do have guidelines on to the schools on if they come directly to them, what to do and how to get it into the treasurer's report. The more challenging policy is the crowdfunding, because, I'm sorry.
Can we pause on just for 1 second, check out, or to kind of discuss the gift one as well?
Yes.
I don't know if you have any questions.
Go ahead.
After that. But, so kind of 2 questions. One, in the history of the district, we've had a lot of folks donate a lot of things that sometimes are money and sometimes are things we have to liquidate as a district. We prefer the cash, right? But they're easier to handle. But and that idea though, if someone's donating something of value, is that value what has to be reported up through the channels to come for board approval?
Yes, and what we typically do is look for like replacement cost value, because there's a lot of companies that when they do their technology refresh programs, they want to give us their old stuff, and so it has to go through review from the the technology department to make sure it meets our standards, and then we recognize the fair market value. I remember a couple of years ago, Dr. Rudnick came to us because somebody was donating some artwork to us, and we had to do some investigation on what to value that at. And so yes.
And then
both.
the other thought is that, we typically will have people who donate multiple times, right? Like, you'll keep donating things on a regular basis or on like kind of rolling basis. And do those come up individually?
Every time we receive something, yes.
Okay. Because I think, like, for me, that would be the one concern what I would have with having a threshold is that potentially you may have someone who, in order to avoid having the board approve it, the old bank method there, right? Like, instead of having it show up in your bank records, you get just that $1 less.
Yes.
And then it never becomes something that is seen by the public in the same way that if it came to the board and was part of a board meeting, it would be.
Right. And I think all of our generous donors should be recognized for their generosity, regardless of how much it is.
If they want to.
If they want to, yes.
And that's
a lot of times they'll come through as an anonymous at their request, yes.
I was going to say that's the conundrum that they may not want to. No. Okay.
Okay, so then we hadn't gone to the crowdsourcing part, also the policy. So that was the next one she was giving. Yeah.
Except we have a blank there. So from the finance committee, that there isn't a minimum threshold.
I would probably agree with that. I think with maybe the exception of like see, the only thing I would have to say is like if we have to approve a $25 like item, I think that's some little bit of a ridiculous thing to say. So I don't know if there's a way to put like a de minimis value, or like if someone gives something to us that is of no value or like very little value.
Well, I think Dan suggested like $1,000, and we can still do it. But if it's, he was concerned at the if we say everything that if we happen to miss something, we'll be out of compliance with the policy. So he was trying to give us some room to.
Yeah, I think like if we did a value, I think it has to be something lower than 1,000 though, because I think 1,000 is still a little high.
Yeah.
So I mean, 250, 100, something in that range, where it's things that people could give. If I donated a camera to the school, I don't want to have to then have that approved by the board and value as a gift to a school, right?
I think
Like
250 is a good amount.
I was going to ask, can we do like when you donate to Goodwill and they give you a sheet and it says like, hey, what do you think the value is? But I think to Vice President Craig's point, $25, $100 is a lot of work that I don't think is necessary. But I would think like I would even say like 500 because that's significant. Whatever the IRS threshold is what I was thinking. Isn't there a number that you can give to charity where it's like the number, if it's above a certain number you report it, but if it's anything 500 or less, you just write that number down. Is that right? No,
I don't know. I write it all down.
Well, I know there's a number that the IRS is. I was gonna say you probably would. I'm talking to the wrong person, but I. Yeah, they're the honest ones. I think there is a number, but I think there's like a number for your tax purposes that it's like, is it after a certain number you're not going to get any more? It's like $500. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it's like whatever you donated. If you say 700, they're only going to give you 500. So whatever that number is for tax purposes, I think is the.
Okay, so we'll assume it's 500, but we'll investigate before we bring it back to policy. Okay.
Next.
All right, crowdfunding. So we get a lot of questions and phone calls about, can we do a GoFundMe? Can we do this? Can we do that? And so we felt the need to create a policy around it so that, and the state auditors recommends that we do create a policy. What's the name of the organization? The Choose Me, Donor thank you. That's already in practice in the field. We just don't have a policy to, we haven't been reporting on those. Where I'm proposing that we put in on a periodic basis, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whatever, in the treasurer's report to say, these are the donations that came through. Because my biggest concern is that people participating might be getting things donated that aren't in compliance with our curriculum or our policies. And so right now we don't have any control over any of that. And so we want to make sure that if an employee participates in a crowdfunding, that they have to follow the rules of the board policies.
No, and I think this is important also because, so one, I generally hate crowdfunding for that exact reason that you end up with one person having to track what they've received.
Yes.
And I guess maybe the one question I would have on that is this would also allow us to further provide guidance around what is an appropriate thing that you could crowdsource fund for versus an inappropriate thing within a school, right? So like,
kind of like our allowable uses document. Okay, we can work on that.
So I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Were you
He's
done?
done, and I can hold off on my, go ahead.
So the part that makes me pause is 4, where it says other considerations. It has to be conducted on district-approved platforms, directly to the school. No send money directly to the person. School retains property ownership of items received. Is that? Let me ask my question first. Is that generally what other districts are doing? Because I'm wondering what is to stop someone if a teacher says, hey, I need a projector, and someone says, oh, okay, I'll go out and buy you the projector. What if the person doesn't want to give it to the district, is my point. But they want to give it to the teacher. Or if a teacher says, hey, I actually literally just gave to a principal that was raising money for their teachers. And it says in here, no money can be collected. So I'm wondering, I want us to account for it, but I don't want us to be too limiting to it. So I'm wondering, is this in compliance with what other districts are doing with regard to their crowdsourcing?
This is, and I wish Dan was able to attend he could speak to the legal part of it, but this is basically what I think we took this from Columbus and then personalized it to us. But
Okay.
yes, Columbus City Schools has their crowdfunding policy, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to add on. So this has been a topic that we have brought up and, just with changes in leadership, and I'm just so happy to see it get to this point. I think this is from an audit perspective and a compliance concern perspective, something that's always worried me. And why it worries me is, let's say in the scenario of a well-intended donor giving cash directly to a teacher via a crowdfunding platform. The person believes they're donating to the district, but as soon as that cash hits an individual's account, and not to imply malfeasance but just from a control standpoint, they've donated now to an individual rather than the district directly. And I think this is a great opportunity to better guide people to an approved platform where we do have oversight and control. So you kind of create this balance, and that's really what we've all talked about through all of these meetings, is how do we empower people to do this great work with some level of, kind of to use the guardrails comparison, with some level of control as well. Because I think that we don't want to see well-intended donors funds not end up where they're supposed to. And I think also from a district liability standpoint, we need to ensure that funds that are in fact donated to the district comply with allowable expenses and follow all of those routes that, as a district, we are responsible for upholding. So that's the balance I think we're trying to strike. And I do hope that this policy provides enough high-level guidance, and then administrative policy can kind of fine-tune that mentioned balance.
I have one more question.
Okay.
So is it possible, or any other districts doing this, where the platform lands on the district website and then the person is directed to the district, and then the accountability is there and it can be dispersed to the teacher at that point? I guess I'm just wondering, is there a way that if we need to know that things are happening, we can kind of direct it to the website and say, hey, go, if you want to donate to Ms. Smith, go to CPS, and then there's a, I don't know, donors choose button, I don't know, but then that we get that accountability, but then the teacher still has the autonomy to be able to do what they want to do. I guess that's what I'm trying to see, because I know I was just solicited by and supported a principal that was wanting to do something because she wasn't allowed to do it within the confines of the district, but she wanted to do it for her team. So I'm wondering, can we still support that if we were to control it in another way? And is there anyone else doing that?
I think putting a link on our website is the easy part. I don't know if other districts are doing that. Do you know if in your research?
Yeah, so I guess to answer the first part of your question, and I am dipping my toe into the administrative policy that may follow this, but what is in existence now is Donors Choose is a great organization that heavily partners with the district currently and has for many years. However, we haven't been fully recognizing that centrally or managing that centrally. So this is an opportunity to utilize the monthly reports that they have available and possibly give credit where credit is due as well. So I think from a centralization, it may be nothing more than just acknowledging something that's already been in existence and in practice, and maybe guiding people to our preferred site, whatever that is, albeit Donors Choose or whatever administration and the board decide. So I think that's a centralization of things that are already happening, to answer that part. And then on the other side of things, in terms of what other districts are doing, that's what we have seen through our comparison and kind of a case study, is that districts tend to choose a couple or one preferred platform so they can keep their arms around them. And I think that's the key balance, though, is the centralization for oversight, but the autonomy so that teachers and principals and school leaders can still fund the initiatives that are important to their students in their classrooms.
You okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Julia, a quick comment?
Yes, I don't know that anyone who gives to a teacher through Donors Choose thinks they're giving something to the district. They think they're giving it to that teacher and that classroom. And I do know that when there are donations given to a school, that it goes into sometimes the black hole of the budget and then they can't access it. So whatever you do, the district is not providing all the resources that teachers need in the classroom. If you walked into a classroom and only saw the things that the district provided, it would be minimal. And if you want to have a good culture within your classroom, it costs thousands of dollars a year. And those additional resources, their family and friends are giving to them. And so how is that going to be managed? Because I don't think anybody trusts getting money for a field trip from a Donors Choose to pay and have it go through in the appropriate manner, because they can't even get supplies ordered.
Okay, is that the editorial?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll give an example, though, of a type of thing that I know has happened in the past with our district, which is that, again, many of our athletics teams and stuff will do different ways of raising funds for themselves. And there have been examples, not getting into far into detail, but of where those funds were given for those resources, they were dedicated to that, but no one knew the exact amount that was raised. No one knew who had that, like where that amount was, because it didn't go through any district channel whatsoever. And I think part of what is being talked about with this crowdsourcing is we are still in some form or fashion, if someone's recruiting dollars in for our district with their role in our district, in their capacity in our district, at some level there's an expectation that the district has some type of authority to make sure it's not being pilfered or taken away or whatever. And so I think there's a space to hold accountability without also necessarily putting into a general fund or that. And I think that's maybe what we're looking at, is how do we both allow for crowdsourcing where folks can do those resources for the things that they need, because we also know that the state ain't giving us any more money to do what we need to do, but also to do it in a way so that if you get $1,000, that we know you got the $1,000, not that someone is sitting there with their own bank account having to control it out or keep it on a separate thing or create another bank account somewhere else to do those practices, which I think is part of what is the fear, is that then when that money is not accounted for, or if something were to happen, we would rather not have to discipline or simply not understanding how to do or not having done it correctly, and rather just provide the resources to allow them to do those things that are necessary because they need those additional resources for those programs, for those or there are different resources within our schools. And I know athletics is one, and I've seen this before, which is they're absolutely raising it for a legit reason. They're going to spend every dollar on a legit reason. But if you're putting it into your PNC account or your Fifth Third account, or we're in trouble as a district.
Well, with all this, go away and take care of this.
Gladly.
Back next month.
Yes.
So we can send it to Paul.
Yes.
Okay, next.
Where would you like to go next?
Although I really want to go to I think we had the discussion about our Saturday update or reaction. I think we made that pretty clear. So I'm okay with that, and some of this other stuff which we have to get the guys to report. But on the cops thing, I would like Landon to see that or be able to carry it away with him and what have you. And then we still have a quorum, but we won't be much longer.
So, sorry, Rob, I really tried to go and order the agenda, and she's messing me up.
Knows better. Rob, do we have
There
any
you go.
public
Okay, you found
folks
it?
that want to speak? That's the spirit. One of the six.
Okay, so
Which one are we on?
hit your next slide. The
This is
item number 800.
I'm staying here extra for this.
These are the slides we shared last month. So you wanted the names of the school buildings, and we gave you what we could. But there's documents. Then I contacted Brenda Weimer. She's out of town, and so she said as soon as she gets back out of town, she's going to go back to those original documents to find. So you see over there it says 28 buildings, automated systems, computerized HVAC systems. We don't have a list of what those 28 buildings are. It's in those source documents that she has. Or we weren't able to find them in the records upstairs. So this shows you the schools of everything that we know, but when I've asked Brenda for more information, and she should bring it so I can bring it back into the next
Okay.
meeting.
I want to get this on the record because it's Saturday also somebody said additional revenue. And I've gotten a lot of questions from people. I don't know, do we have a few people watching Saturday?
I think
Or
we
did they
did.
all call each other and tell what was going on? Because there you go. That's very good. I think I met every one of them. 3 days. I want to get this on the record about additional revenue. Additional revenue means the levy, or additional revenue means this or that or whatever. Or if it's a preschool promise, maybe it's more money or whatever. The other thing, thank you for it. The thing I want to say is it's one of the other opportunities for additional revenue, but it would cost us as well, is the possibility of comps.
Correct. It's a form of borrowing or financing a project, construction or building related, and it acts as an operating lease. So you're basically putting up your building and land as collateral.
Right.
And it allows you to borrow money, but you have to make room in your budget to make that annual lease payment. I said operating, I meant capital.
Yeah, that's
So,
it's like, oh, wait.
sorry, and as soon as it was out of my mouth, I knew it was wrong. So, so when we did the last COPS issue to purchase and renovate the Mercy building to do Gamble Montessori High School and the CANS renovation, that was about $1.5 million in lease payments, and it was a $22 million borrowing. So you double that, you're going to go to $3 million.
If I could, I would like us to be thinking about the fact, based upon what was presented in the fact finding regarding facilities, which wasn't complete. That was a good intro, wasn't like everything imaginable. We know we don't have enough in the general fund budget to do any of that kind of stuff.
That's correct.
That kind of whatever. So we know down the road, not so far down the road, we're going to have to probably go to the taxpayers about our facilities,
Correct.
right?
We did a town hall on this too.
And you did a wonderful town hall. And so we're laying that groundwork. I would also say that we have to, and this is at least my perception of how we have to do this, in order to go to the people to ask for more money, if indeed we have to do that for facilities, we have to demonstrate out of ad hoc and out of all this other work people have been doing, we have to demonstrate that we are making the most efficient use of the facilities that we have. And I think that COPS can kind of play into that and be part of that, because we do have a number of schools, a number of facilities that are full. I won't use the word overcrowded because that gives a wrong impression, but they're full and that they are facing growth. And we can name some of them if we have to. And we also have a number of our facilities that are not used in the most efficient way. And we're going to have to deal with that, because you're going to have to lay the groundwork for 2 years to prove that we're worthy of asking for more money, especially in these conditions that people find themselves. And so I would really like us as a committee to think long and hard about how we could use COPS as part of that bridge. I hate to use the word bridge, or we'll get Jeremy here talking about bridges. That's an inside story, but that's going to get us to where we would be able, because we would be able to show growth. So right now, it would be hard to go help us take care of our facilities if we don't start showing some growth. Okay, we got to go back and show growth. So I think COPS can help us get that growth. I think COPS could also get us to help, so how we're able to use our facilities most appropriately and how we can be successful. So I think getting that last list from Brenda would be very useful, and then showing what couldn't be counted as.
Right, so once we get the list from Brenda, and the reason we're talking about these lists is because under a COPS, once your building or your asset is encumbered under a COPS, you can't issue another, like a second mortgage, right?
Okay.
So we need to get the exact list of what's already encumbered under a COPS issue, because we've used COPS before, and marry that up to the facilities plan to see which building on this plan can't be used on this funding source.
Absolutely. And I also want to say I resist the facilities plan as it's being cited. That was strictly a maintenance and restoration phased kind of huge amount of money to preserve the buildings it had. It did not necessarily address the growth.
So, right, there's two plans. One that's coming out of ad hoc on the restructuring, re-engineering of the use of the capacity, the most effective use of those buildings. Then there's the facility repair plan that is based off of the facility master plan, now 20 years old. So the first building is 20 years old and is showing wear and tear on roofs. And it's, the roofs only last 20 years. So the roofs, the chillers, the boiler, those things have to be upgraded. And that's what the repair plan is about. So there's two plans, right? And we have to make sure that we take both into consideration when talking about sourcing the funding.
Yes, and I would say that the most immediate one is actually that second one, which is more a product of the ad hoc than the larger, where there's no way we can get enough money to do that unless we go to the people.
You're talking about to build a building, the master plan?
Yeah, the master plan. That's the huge thing that we do asking the people. But in order to get ready to go ask the people,
oh, Julie,
we would probably, bless your heart, we probably need to evolve.
So I have a couple questions. COPS can only be used for facilities, correct?
Construction, and to purchase a building or improve a building, yes.
Okay, and then once a building is in a COPS, it has to come out of a COPS in order to be used again.
That's the general rule. There are some exceptions that we'd have to get, Brenda would have to help us with.
Okay. Is it possible, I know we're talking in ad hoc about the being more efficient with our buildings. But I'm wondering, is it possible that we could get to a point where we don't have any more buildings to cop? Because everybody's either still stuck in a cop or we're putting them in a cop.
Yeah.
The concern is how can is there any rule around having to keep some assets out of a cops that we have those assets, if that makes sense? Like, where we have to have so much money we have to have so much cash on hand. Is there a rule where we can't encumber all of our buildings under cops, whether it be an old one or a new one, because we wouldn't have anything else to cop?
We wouldn't.
Does that make sense?
Well, there's two things there. So yes, there's going to be restrictions on some buildings won't be able to participate in that kind of funding mechanism.
Okay.
But the bigger restriction is, do we have enough cash to make the annual payment? If you can't just go out and do $1 billion cops,
Okay.
right?
So that has to be part of the budget, that would be the budget that we are working on now.
It depends on when the cops would be issued, because it depends on the timing.
You'd have to be
Yes.
issuing it pretty, to get yourself ready. That's my point about a levy. I mean, a levy's gonna happen if we're serious about our facilities.
But the levy wouldn't be for facilities. The levy would be for other things, right? Because we
No.
would already have our.
It'd be the facilities too.
So it could be facilities plus other things, but a permanent improvement levy could be used for any asset that's over 5 years. So improvements, it could be technology, it could be curriculum. It has a little bit more wiggle room there, but it can't be used for just general operations,
Right.
like raises or stuff like that.
But that
Um,
helps that helps with the operations budget in a way by providing another source of revenue for
Correct.
instance.
Right, but you can't use
Yeah,
you
right.
can't use utilities, for example, spend it. So so that's a direct source of revenue into the district, where a COPS is a borrowing, so you're having to pay that back. Okay.
Yeah, I just was trying to figure out. I guess I'm mixing my commercial board hat with my personal hat. Like, okay, if we keep on mortgaging our house, that's not going to be efficient. You know, like we're borrowing money to repair the house, but are we ever really getting out of the hole of the repairs? Like, I feel like we're just adding. Yeah. Okay, I'm trying not to.
Yes, and then we are restricted at the amount of debt we can take on. COPS don't fall into the debt limitation calculation, but we couldn't just go to the bank and borrow money because there's a rule. Is it 2%?
I think so.
There's
There's a couple layers, but one
Yeah,
of them is
so there are some rules that indicate whether we can borrow enough money, and then we were actually over that because during the facility master plan, the $480 million bond levy was part of that borrowing. So I believe that we've paid enough down so that we're not over the limit anymore. No,
I don't know. I think we're
I haven't looked at it in a while. I'll have to look at it.
Basically, they take your valuation at the higher valuation figure.
Okay.
So it may go up a little bit with valuation.
Right.
But it's small amount.
My last question is, do you remember the number for the facilities repair plan?
$32 million a year for 5 years.
That didn't make me feel better, but okay, I got you. Thank
And
you.
that's now.
Yeah.
You meaning, as it moves through.
Right, construction costs are going up dramatically, right? And we did use some ESSER to get that started on the more concerns on safety issues that needed to happen. But we don't really have a value on the ad hoc building cost yet. I haven't finalized what that looks like.
Well, I'm already 10 pages in, and
okay,
it feels
Good,
better
that's
looking
exciting.
at it. So, yeah, well, not a word I would use right now.
Any other issue regarding COPS? You don't know when Brenda will be back and be able to get that?
I think she'll be back next week, so it'll be soon.
Okay, and let's not wait till finance. Will you get that information?
I can send it to the
That would
board.
be
Mhm.
helpful, at least to the ad hoc committee. in the final, send it to the board, but the board will get it, they will, what's this about? We didn't do our monthly, efforts, some of those are written, we do the grants. I know there was something that you wanted to share regarding grants.
Well, so real quickly, that I'll go into them, but there's a list of community CRAs that need to go through the board Monday night. They'll be in the treasurer's report. There's 9 of them. Okay.
Go ahead, do it now.
All right, there's 9 of them. It's slide 7 is where the summary is. So there's 9 agreements, an annual revenue of $1 million and a total revenue of almost 16. So some of the kind of big projects, and you can read them at your leisure, but they'll be coming through the treasurer's report for approval Monday night. All right, where am I? Okay, so going to did that slide number 9. So we just finished the final expenditure report cycle on all of our state and federal grants. And so what this is showing you is that the grants, even though they're a 15-year cycle, 15-month cycle, sorry, July through June, you encumber the funds, but then you have until September 30th to actually pay the invoices that come in after the year end, okay? So go ahead to the next slide. So as of fiscal year 23, at September 30th, we had 85% spending goal allocation, and only 41% met that, and a non-public 43% met that. So we did file all the FERs on time. If you go to the next slide. So in the highlights, this is a list of all the grants that it's basically spent out there, the money, the available monies for the year. The slide following shows you where we had some challenges. So Title I, we spent $18 million, which is only at 61%. Now some of these funds have carryover, so we'll jump to that next slide. Title I, you have a 15, you have from January to June to social development. The challenge for that was they couldn't find enough tutors to do the work. And then 2, the professional development that they wanted to do district-wide. We can't use Title I funds for district-wide stuff because of supplant. So whatever training is being paid for by Title I can only be used, the Title I teachers can only, or the staff in the Title I schools are the ones that can participate. So then you're causing an equity issue. Well, we used other funds to do that, but what the plan was to that carryover money, that's what we were going to spend it on, and it didn't work. So we have plans on how to address this issue moving forward. Now, what they do, here's a note I want to point out too. Under Title II, which is the last one down there, our allocation was $1.7 million, which is a typical allocation. Our carryover was $4.2 million. And that's because during COVID, they relaxed the carryover rules and they just let us keep carrying it over. But because Title II is for improving teacher quality, nobody did professional development during COVID, right? So the money just got unspent, and you would have to pull all the teachers out of the buildings all the time in order to spend that money. So we had a hard time spending them. So next slide. So what happens when the money's not spent? So the funds that allow carryover, there's some funds that allow the entire fund. You can not spend any of it and carry it into the new year and you get to keep it. That's like impact aid. Some funds don't allow any carryover, like Perkins and the Psych Intern Grant. And then there's some funds that allow the prior year's allocation to be carried over, like IDEA B. And Title I is an example where it has a 15% limit of last year's allocation. Slide. So what happens if you don't spend all that money is they that's over the carryover allocation of the limit. The rule is they sweep the money from all the districts that didn't spend it, and then they reallocate it out. So it's not like you don't ever get the opportunity to spend that money again. You want to spend the money in the year that is allocated to you on the students of that year, but in the event that you can't because of conditions, sorry, they do reallocate it. It won't be the exact same amount, but on occasion we will get additional allocations because other people unspent funds. So when we know what those are going to be, we'll report them out. We just don't know yet. We also have the opportunity under Title I to, they call it the September 30 report. It's that 120 days. So we can claim current year expenses against that allocation and file it by December. So they're working through that right now to minimize the amount of money that does carry over. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so working through that. But they have to be qualifying expenses. So next slide. So why did we find ourselves in this situation? Well, we called it the perfect storm because we had so much turnover in leadership people that were responsible for spending the grants. And then we had a significant, I think we had 4 new principals last year who may not have understood. And we had an 80% turnover in our grants team due to promotions and retirements. And so that made it very, and all happened like within weeks of each other, the grants team. So the carryover years from prior years because of COVID were higher than were anticipated, so we weren't used to doing that. And because we went back from school-wide pool to regular, the budgets, the funding is more restrictive when you're not in a school-wide pool, so it makes it harder to spend the money as quickly as you can. But now that we've gotten through the whole year of that relearning again and the allowable uses, we're hoping to be able to stay on top of spending the money in the most appropriate way quickly. So next slide. Under Title I, you remember the supplement versus supplant rules, okay? And this was really hard because the example Mike is giving us here, I want to give Mike credit for this PowerPoint, but he's on a much needed vacation, so I'm trying to do his slides for him. Like if you want to adopt third grade math book, you can only send it to the title school. So that means the Kilgores and Fairviews don't get that math book. So that's the difference between supplement and supplant. You also can't cut general fund and replace it with Title I. You can't say, we're not going to pay the general fund out of the math curriculum this year. We're going to charge it all to Title I. Yeah, that's a supplant. You can't do that. So you can only reduce your title spending if you're also reducing your general fund spending. Other grants have rules about like the neglected and delinquent. It can only be spent at certain sites for those purposes. The school improvement grants can only be spent at that school, individual school. So if they don't spend the money, we can't say Wagner Elementary can go spend it, making stuff up. And then Idea B is you can only spend that money for students with disabilities. So they're very restricted funding. So moving forward, we have a plan. Next slide. Thank you. To go back and redoing training and education on both the new grants people that are now there, and we've re-kicked off our Finance 101 classes that the school principals and central office administrators are going through. And it doesn't talk just about federal spending, but all of our spending rules. The one thing that caught us on Title I is, remember at the beginning of last school year, the superintendent pulled non-load-bearing teachers and put them in the classroom because we had so many vacancies in the classroom. Well, a lot of those teacher coaches were funded by title funds. They remained vacant for the whole year, and we were focusing on vacancies in the general fund and didn't realize that there was vacancies in the federal funds that were causing us to underspend those salaries. So now we have some new monthly reports to look at and stay on top of to make adjustments as necessary. Also, with the transition of the grants team, we found out after the fact that the monthly grants meetings were only happening with central office people and not the school-based people. So that we've corrected that as well. We have the allowable use guidelines out there, and we're re-educating everybody on the proper use of those funds. We're also creating an ELT executive leadership team that meets weekly, but monthly we are going to have all the financials in more detail so that we can stay on top of any challenges as a group and then act on it quickly. And then we're in the process of creating a new, more stringent escalation process so that when we see challenges, who do we contact to make stuff happen on a quickly basis.
How will you see? How you didn't see it? All
Well,
those changes.
we're looking at more often and more detail. So we've been seeing this data on a monthly basis in Finance Committee.
Oh, my favorite.
I know.
And
So Mike and I are getting to getting into the weeds on a more regular basis in order to stay on top of that, because we just weren't able to spend it all.
So we, as was reported, I guess, last month, we lost money. We didn't spend money. We had.
We didn't have it. We spend the money first and then we ask for reimbursement. So we didn't lose any money. We just we weren't able to take advantage of funds that were allocated to us. But that doesn't mean that we've lost it all. When we get the new allocations, we may get quite a bit of it back, actually. And the other thing we're doing now, and I forgot to put this on the slide, was we are estimating what our carryovers are going to be right now. We won't know them, we won't receive them until January. Grant carryovers. We're creating the budgets now on estimates so that when we get it in January, if there's a difference, then we can make a quick adjustment. But we don't start planning in January and then don't spend it until May, and then you're stuck again. You're in this cycle of chasing it down. So I'm trying to get people to think about, let's project what we're going to get and get a plan together, and so we can move forward. Questions?
Yes.
Well, it just makes my hair stand up on my head when I know that our title schools are title schools for a reason, because they have more need, and there's money that's going back because of whatever the reason. So I guess I don't understand, and I would like to, how when you say professional development couldn't happen on a global level, district-wide level, because it couldn't happen there and we couldn't use title money, we didn't give the professional development to the teachers that are in the title schools. So why can't we, if it can't happen district-wide because it's title money, offer that to the teachers in the title school or the professional development? I don't know if it's just for teachers. Why did we not do that? I guess
I can't answer that question, but I will tell you that there is a district-wide professional development committee that's working through a holistic plan so that then they can figure out what's the best way to maximize funding that way. I don't know why we wouldn't say, okay, send this money to those schools and then let them pick from a menu of professional development. I don't know. I'd have to get involved with the superintendent in that question.
I understand, but the number is super significant. When we go back to slide 13 and we look at Title II, and you said it's to improve teacher quality, and the carryover is $4 million.
Right, so our annual allocation is only 1.8. This carryover, there was so much carried over because we were waived on our carryover during the COVID years, and when we weren't in operation, we're all remote, there wasn't any professional development efforts, so we just kept carrying the money over. But we've had so much turnover from the administrator that was in charge of that grant that it just didn't get spent.
I mean, I understand, but that to me is a service that we could offer, but we're not offering to improve teacher quality. So again, I get why it happened. It just to me is not acceptable that it does. Can you tell me what Title 1A is for with almost a $7.2 million carryover?
That's a disadvantaged pupil fund. So for the economically disadvantaged, remember we talked about the free and reduced lunch rates, which qualifies a school to be a Title I school. So they have to submit a plan. They have to submit a plan on how they're going to use their Title I allocations. So what the superintendent did for this budget cycle is they said, if you had I can't remember the exact scores, but if you had a graduation score of that on your report card, then you got a graduation specialist. If you had a ELL population that was greater than 20%, you got an ELL specialist. And if your attendance was X, you got an attendance specialist. I don't remember what those rules were, but that way we're ensuring that the monies are being spent on the challenges of those individual schools to help them get to the next level.
And the carryover was 7.1 with that as the goal.
So that's not all our money. So there's some of the auxiliary is in that too. Our carryover was about 5 million. I should have said that earlier. I forgot. So the 5 million was supposed to help pay for the professional development, and the superintendent had wanted to do, I think it was math tutoring, if I'm not mistaken. But they had a hard time hiring people to do the tutoring. So that the plan went a little awry because of that.
So we could also use title funding for curriculum in those schools, yes, or software for those students to have access to something additional that they may need to supplant their current.
Supplement, not supplant.
I'm sorry,
so it has to
supplement.
be above and beyond what the district is already doing.
Right. But so they could have the extra reading specialists if we were talking about staffing, right?
Correct.
And they could have had extra software, but we're not giving that to them because we don't want to do it district-wide. I know you may not be able to answer some of these questions. I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around the fact that we have $7 million specifically designated to title schools in that particular category that need it, and they're not utilizing it.
So remember, we've got the money in January, and there's other people's decisions on how to spend that money, but we got the money in January. You're not going to go out and hire reading specialists in January. We're having trouble finding classroom teachers.
I get it, but then
Right.
we could also have purchased software if we can't find the physical bodies. We have the ability to do other things other than personnel, right?
It's a matter of choice, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to understand. So as we look at the budget for the next year, can we anticipate what the carryover would be so that we can put the money for those particular schools? That's tied to their grade from the report card. I understand what report cards are measuring, but we could still differentiate that title funding based on the budget so that the schools may not have to have a decline. I wanted to, you said that we can't decrease their general fund and increase their title funding, but we could put resources in the schools that need them, that are title schools, based off of an anticipated carryover?
Yes. So we're using some of the anticipated carryover to help add those additional Title I schools. Because remember, when they got added, we'd already allocated the Title I budget out. So we're using the anticipated carryover to help with that. And I believe the superintendent's working on some other additional resources as well. Yes.
So we need to get a report, or can we get a report for the budget discussions around the anticipated title carryover so that we could put that along with the ad hoc and along with the facilities? I think things need to be discussed in totality.
Exactly. And then we said at the last finance committee when it showed that timeline, and I realized the timeline's changed, but that we were going to do two significant things differently. One was we were going to start the central office at the same time as the schools, and we're going to start all the funds at the same time.
Okay.
Instead of the other way
Later.
around, because that way you can have a plan that maximizes use of those funds, and you're not always after the fact saying, oh, but this is in the general fund, you can't use it for that, So we want to do that. I've been trying to get to a consolidated budget for a while now, and so we're committed to doing it that way.
So we'll have the anticipated carryover stuff soon as we talk about the budget.
Yeah, we're working on those now.
Okay.
And it just
25.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess just listening, because a lot of our members are being used as substitute teachers when teachers are out. And just listening to all of this, I'm just wondering, is there some way that some of this money can be used to further educate them as well, as far as PD days are concerned, trainings with autism, or different programs that are here that our members can participate in, because our members get left out, but they're being used to fill all of these situations. So I'm just wondering if some of this money can be used for programs for us. Because I know, no disrespect, but I always hear teachers, but our members is carrying this district.
That's a great
And so,
idea, and we'll
yeah.
look into that. Yeah.
Thank you.
If they're in title schools, they could use title funding. It doesn't have to be district-wide, because the parents that are in title schools, this title funding could cover that, especially their professional development, right?
Yes.
Now,
More than
whether
likely, the non-title schools will have less of those kinds of paras because they're not as overloaded. I'm guessing, but excellent idea. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We could use title funding for that, right?
I have to look into it. I don't want to say wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just speaking of, sorry. I'm just speaking of with all the mental health issues and things that are going on. Our people are hands-on, and we really need the training that everybody else is getting, because we're a part of the school.
Right.
And for us to be left out is not right, and it's really in need.
So Cody just wrote me a note that Title IV could be used for safety. That's what it's for, right? Drug and safety. And so we will certainly look into that and work with the superintendent to come up with a plan. Yeah.
It's almost worth
That was a good.
your time anyway.
Yeah, the 12 hours that you've been here.
Because that's really good, Miss Emily.
I don't wear any.
Well,
And technically, just to clarify on number 12, for the Title IV, we've only spent 31% of that, right? For the year.
Yeah, so we had 2 turnovers under the grant, the person who was over that grant, the positive school culture manager. So.
Okay.
I have no comment.
I'm going to keep it to myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
KPI is the last thing, right?
I don't know if it's the last thing, but it could be next. No, we didn't talk about student fees. We did that in policy, but we need to do it here.
Okay.
Right. So,
Do KPI.
okay. Turning it to Cody.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Good man.
Alrighty. So if we're gonna flip a couple slides here, I believe it's slide 21 starts at Mr. Rob. So actually, if you go back a slide real quick. So what we gave you on this long piece of paper is just a condensed file of the KPI, a couple columns hidden just to kind of make printing matters easier. Key performance indicator. So if that little hyperlink there will show the full file of this, it'll show like the diversity codes and all that good stuff on here as well. So, all right, next slide. Originally in September, we had presented a list of missing KPI measures for all the contracts for FY24 to the executive leadership team. They went through and went to collect those. So originally there was 888 contracts. Of that, we had 663 KPI measures. And so that meant we are missing 225. So it kind of worked out in our pretty little chart that it was 75, 25%. If you flip to the next slide. So as you can see, the updated September numbers. So what we wanted to do was, you can see it decreased a little bit in the contracts, just by about 11 or 9, just because some maybe got deleted out or weren't used. But you can see a massive jump in the KPI measures that were collected through the efforts of the ELT and working with their departments. So now we only had 36 missing from the original September list. And then on the next slide is a cumulative year-to-date as of October prior to this this week. We're up to 1,002 contracts. Of that, we have 884 KPI measures collected and only missing 118. So as you can see, we're trending upwards, and as contracts go up, the number of KPIs being collected are also going up. So it's starting to stick. Any questions?
Question, how does the finance committee want to be kept informed as we are adding more KPIs? We didn't want to stop it going, a contract went through the treasurer's report because it was missing a KPI, because we didn't want to stop academic progress. So we're doing the catch up as we're training people. But so how would the committee prefer to be kept updated?
How do you do?
What is efficient for you? You know, I could say weekly, and you're like, okay, that's a lot. But what would be something that is manageable? I don't like to add extra work. I just, when people say, okay, well, I did this and I needed to have that, and then it comes on the floor and it's not there for some, it makes us look inconsistent. So
Right.
what is consistent? Is it monthly, quarterly?
I think probably monthly at Finance Committee, just to give you, here are the updated KPIs. And then shortly, we should start measuring them to see, you know, like if there are investments we want to continue or not as part of our budget process. Remember, in Finance Committee, typically is it November, December is when you all look at the really big contracts. And so we should probably talk about what that looks like. But
Yeah, we have to. What we started last year was good. With the 2 of you reporting instead of the. But we probably need to hone that and find a way to make that even more.
okay, we can plan for December or
Yeah.
January, maybe even, because we're a little bit further back.
Okay.
Okay.
That help?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I shared with Policy Committee, I went back and looked at data and I tried to do some cost analysis, and as promised, I met with a group of principals, Dan joined me on the call to get some of their feedback and their concerns. And so if we were to take every student that we have and charge at the full rate that's on the student fees letter, if we waived all those fees, we would have added about $1 million to the budget. There's only one school in that math that looks like, when you compare the fiscal year 23 collections with the projected number times the student fees, that's Clark Montessori. But I think in their collections, there's something beyond that's collected and reported that's not part of our district fees. So we have to dig into that a little bit deeper. But I try to come up with some different scenarios where it wouldn't be horrendous to add to the budget, but it wouldn't be too harmful to the schools if they lost those collections, so we'd be replacing them. The school principal's biggest concern was waiving all the fees because they don't feel like their foundations and their parents can make up the difference. The conversation at Policy was about waiving all fees and the district paying for all fees, including student activities. So I thought we were just talking about the district standard. And so the conversation has kind of grown. Dan reminded me during the conversation with the principals, the elementary schools realized the high schools were collecting fees that really belonged to the elementary schools, but they didn't get collected until it was time to graduate. And so the high schools weren't sharing that revenue with them. So that was an interesting conversation. But so as we were talking in Policy Committee, I ran a report for last year, and we collected $215,000 in the student managed student activity fund. Those are the senior clubs, you know, the grade level clubs. It was where students actually manage the money, not us. We just hold it in our bank accounts. I don't think we're talking about replacing that, but the student activity fees that the district manages, we collected $2.4 million. And we believe, after a conversation, that money will probably double in policy, yes. Because we feel like for the advanced placement test fees, as an example, that if families didn't have to pay for those tests, we might encourage more people to participate, which would drive the cost up. Also with other student activities. So we agreed to kind of put a $5 million placeholder in our budget tracker document.
I'm making a list of the more money we need to spend.
Yes, the finance chair keeps adding to the budget. So any questions?
So my problem with student fees, I have two sides to this coin. I've been on the side where some parents have said, I'm not buying school supplies, take it out of my student fees. So I think there's a complete misunderstanding of what student fees go towards from the parents and or the community. And that's just an awareness piece on our end. And then I also have a problem with the fact that it's kind of self-reporting. We don't know if the parent really is at this is at this income level. We're just assuming that they're correct in saying, hey, I can only afford $10, or hey, I can afford $35. So that part is, I just have a problem anticipating money that we can't, or doing anything with money that is not really accurate. But I also know that we need it. So I wish the superintendent were here, because I think it's an awareness campaign on what the fees are for, what do they go for. But I have also seen where principals, at the end of the year, we have this, you owe $900. And I've actually had where principals can go back and waive those fees, some of those fees. And so you can get waived fees from elementary school principals if you're in high school. And I say this has happened to me where my son was in a Montessori and they took a trip, but he didn't go on that trip. But the fee, like the $600 fee for the trip, was on his fees. And that was from 7th grade, and he was a senior at the time. So we had to contact the principal at the time to get those fees waived. So I think that there just needs to be more communication and awareness around what the fees are, what do they cover, and I don't know if we can send something out to parents annually to let them know what the fees are. I think parents know, but I've had this conversation last year with the whole conundrum around these kids can't graduate because they owe fees. No, parents know. They just forget some, and some of them don't pay. But if we could get into a system where we are letting them know at the end of the year, I don't even know when it is, but this is what your balance is, and this is carrying over. We're not going to stop you from progressing. We're not going to retain you, but we could say, no, you knew on June 1st, we sent a letter out saying that you owed $300. And then on June, 20, the next year, we sent something out. I think that there needs to be a whole thing around what do these fees cover, and then awareness to the parents. But also, certain schools have different fees that are collected. So that, Montessori's have additional fees that are collected that are even outside of AP. And I just think that whole conversation needs to be broader than just the monetary, where it's going, me personally. So that's, I like this, an extra $1 million, let's start it. But to me, there just seems to be still a lot of ambiguity around fees. What is it for? Self-reporting, where is it going?
The direction that I'm getting from policy is that they want to eliminate fees completely and let the district pay for them, don't collect them. So I think
are we talking about student fees, or are we talking about additional school fees? And that's what I mean.
Well, Chair Bolton.
After the policy meeting last month, treasurer rightfully assumed we were talking about district-related fees for student district-related. And when we came back to policy, now Mary was not here today, but when Mike and me, of course, we like to spend money when we run student achievement. We spent millions and proud of it. But I said, I think for the sake of the whole board, I think the dialogue and the discussion should be the elimination of all fees. I mean, $5 for the field trip, and he talked about a field trip. Some parents can't do the $5 and whatever. How much money in a $1 billion budget? How much money are parents and families to patient go back out and ask for money or whatever? The first thing, what do y'all need? I'm writing this check, I'm paying this amount. The AP tests themselves, they're wallet families, and some people go, oh, the wallet, they can afford. No, you have a misconception of wallet enrollment. I mean, some of those kids are paying for, they're taking 5 tests.
I know.
It's a car payment or more.
I brought up AP fees before, and it was dismissed.
And I think we don't charge the kids, at least like we pay for that across the board.
I believe so.
We do.
And I don't understand, since we're making them do all the ACT and why. So there's that, but it's more this nickel and diming too. And I thought we eliminated, and I know we talked about it, and I said this in policy, years ago, the idea of the, pay to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, you start talking about the stuff that we're asking parents to come forward with. So I thought it would be good we're going to have a board discussion on Monday about it. I believe that's been cut forwarded. But the idea of how extensive do we really mean about fees? So she came up with, I think, 3 point something, and then we just put it up to 5, if I recall. We looked at some stuff and it came up 3 point something.
Yeah, so it was 2.6, the 2.3 in the student district managed student activities. And then there's another 467 that we collected as part of the district fees supply thing. So that's 2.8.
And it really sets you over, so that you really get mad at me at this point in time. I mean, thinking in terms of no fees, you're thinking about going back out to the public and being worthy of asking. And when we're talking about facilities or whatever, those are the kinds of things out in the world that make sense. Telling families about no fees, or telling teachers smaller class size. These are things that people understand. That we have to kind of be thinking about how we're messaging and what we're messaging to people. Because I'll tell you what we're messaging now is it's so fragmented and whatever. So I just think we need in this redesign, be it ad hoc or be it the budget or whatever, we have to have some big messaging taking place that is not taking place. People want to support us, but I'll tell you, they're having trouble.
I have 2. As far as the fees, I think when schools went to identification, then those. When the district went to some schools being 100% free and reduced lunch, those kids, all of them really did not qualify for free and reduced lunch. And so then people quit, they didn't have to fill out the form. And that form was the identifier. And if they were on free lunch, however they identified for the free lunch, that would get them a voucher that they wouldn't have to pay the student fees. And so some of the things that we've done to help families and children had some negative backlash on the district, unintended consequences and backlash financially for our district. But I also, on this KPI chart, there's a lot of non-public auxiliary services. Is this all coming from general funds? Because that should be going to those. How are we separating this for? Is it our dollars?
Those are pass-through funds that they use our system to create their contracts. They manage the money.
I understand.
It's not general fund. The fund number is in the column. That's the second to the right.
Okay, so that Fund 590 is auxiliary. So how does that come out?
590 is Title II.
Fund 590, non-public contract auxiliary
So
services.
auxiliary gets part of our title fund, Title I and Title II.
Yeah.
And so it's their Title II monies that they're spending.
So how do we keep those separated so that it doesn't look like those are costs to our budget?
It's pass-through funding, and it's kept separate through special cost centers and the title funds.
So if I go to this 5-year forecast over here.
You won't see that. 5-year forecast is general fund only.
Okay, so that's what we really need to be looking at, because we are losing a lot of money, I think, to some of this in the budget.
So I have a question about the fees. So I lost my point. So I'm wondering, I have a concern about eliminating all of them. The student fees is all I'm talking about. I'm not talking about bus fees. I think that, to Julie's point, we can identify students who may need it. I'm kind of thinking, can't we put some money off to the side, and if and if students need it, then it's there. It kind of supplements activities if they need it. But again, I go back to student fees are not clear. What was the intended purpose of collecting that $35? Well, I'm saying $35 because that's what I paid every year for my kids. And if it was multiple kids, if you, because I had 3 at one point, that can be cost prohibitive, or is, you know, the scale goes down. But I think we need to get a handle on it. It is expensive, but I think parents don't know, because I don't know what the fees were to cover.
So those fees go into a separate fund, Fund 9, and it's only used for supplies and activities that are school-wide. So they can't use it to pay for the senior prom, for example, because the entire school doesn't participate. So
is it like restricted, like title money?
No, it just has to be. It's called uniform supply, school supplies, right? It's the official thing. So it's supposed to be used for supplies for the students to help offset what the district is buying, like consumables.
So if a school doesn't get, like, let's say there's 300 students and only 200 of them in an elementary school, 5th grade, pay, or let's say elementary school, pay that fee. So there's 100 students that didn't. Does that money, how does that work for that school if those 100 students never paid their fee for that year? It doesn't go to that school's Title IX or what, or not
Fund 9, it does. Whatever they collect goes into Fund 9, regardless of what gets charged. Whatever they collect is supposed to be deposited in Fund 9, and it's supposed to be spent on the students of the school to help with consumable supplies.
So if that student goes to graduate and then someone writes a check for a large amount of money, where does that go? Does it go back to that school from 5th grade? You know, I'm trying to understand how does that get
No, that's part of the problem, is that the high schools, whoever collects the money keeps the money.
Okay, okay.
That's part of the problem.
Okay, okay, gotcha. But that's separate from, so we're having we're having multiple topics under this conversation, because that's separate from activity fees, like I want to take a field trip.
Right.
I want to go to the zoo. And my other concern is, if we were to eliminate fees, and we're talking about budget cuts, the natural progression of some of our partners and community members would be, okay, well, I'll pay for this field trip. How does, for the school or for the class? So, now we're talking about the crowdfunding piece.
No.
Or no?
No. So what happened, and people do that a lot. They'll say, here's, because you'll see it go through the treasurer's report. Rothenberg, $5,000 to go to the zoo, for the students to the zoo field trip.
Right.
So that goes into a separate fund because it's donor restricted.
Okay.
So the principal can't go spend the money on
something else,
candy, you know,
okay.
whatever. So if there's a donation that comes in and it's at the principal's discretion or the district's discretion, it goes into one fund. I always get 18 and 19 mixed up. One's discretionary, the other one's restricted. So that's 18 and 19. 200, Fund 200 is student managed fees, activities, like their clubs and the, you know, and then 300 are district managed student activities. So that would be like the intercessions monies, okay? And Fund 9 is supposed to be the district fees to help with offsetting the cost of supplies.
Okay. I know that was a lot.
It is a lot. So, and I know I did them all out in numerical order, but just the way it came. So.
Okay. So I think we just still need to have a conversation. I would love to have a conversation about the fees. I'm going to call it the $35 fee, because that's all I know. The general fees that everyone has to have. I think, to your point, the additional fees that students are being charged, maybe waive those. But I tend to think every parent should understand what they're covering and attempt to cover it. If they can't cover it, then we will know that, because maybe they're a Title IX school, or maybe there's extenuating circumstances if we were to do the free and reduced lunch piece. But I think to attempt to offset that cost, and we're talking about a budget, I don't see $5 million that we can just put off to the side.
Well, I do. I think it's great to put it off this side, but here's my point. What do we say the fee is for, the district fee? You said it's supplies or something?
To offset the cost of classroom supplies.
So right there, you have a communication problem. You want to tell me you got a $500 million budget or $1 billion budget and you're making my kid, making me pay for crayons or paste or glue or whatever?
Yeah, that's true.
That is just a stupid communication. If it's for, I'm going to pay this fee to cover field trips, people can see that.
Yeah. That's true.
Supplies, we should be buying supplies.
Well, we should.
You know?
Yeah, the teachers are.
Teachers are, I mean, I'm 36 years, I get that. My point is, it's to your point, it's a communication problem.
Mm-hmm.
You almost have to restructure the whole thing, so it's not just a financial or messaging, but it's like, what are we really asking people to do?
That's
And,
true.
so, it's gonna be a great discussion.
Whatever direction the board chooses to go in,
Yeah.
we will need to rewrite administrative procedures that are much more robust and do the communication plan. Yes.
Yeah, again,
I get you.
going to the community, we gotta get ourselves in a place where we're saying positive, uplifting, oh yeah, I'm glad you fixed that. Because they just don't think we're fixing things.
We're not.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I was just going to add briefly, one of the things that we worked on this past year around student fees and cash handling was the laborious process for both the families as well as the administration on the waiver process as well. So I think that's kind of the subset I think Jen was just alluding to, strengthening and streamlining the administrative procedure to support. And I think what we saw just anecdotally was the amount of time invested in just waiving fees. So we upload them to only waive them. And so what's all of that work truly for? And I think we talked through some solutions that we can certainly through administrative procedure, overcome, but it just kind of, doubles down on what's the purpose too.
You also start to have a better understanding of what's happening in our schools. I mean, you'd almost have to know, better understand, not that we could control it, but we would be able to monitor what's happening in the schools. You could actually see, okay, this school building, they never took a field trip. These folks were taking 12.
Correct.
And in order to do the equity piece, we have to be able to that kind of knowledge.
I'm with you.
Any other issues before we get to 3 o'clock?
Well, I brought my lunch, man. I know.
I had 2 oranges.
Got this extra caffeine in here.
If there's no other issue, and I don't think we have to, if you can talk to Dr. Moffett.
Oh.
Oh, good. Well, then, no, I take it back. We are adjourned. I need a motion to go into executive session.
I make a motion.
Pending litigation. That's the issue.
Okay.
I second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye and aye. We are now adjourned. Thank you.